like, even if you don't think your vote counts, which a lot of votes maybe don't in our electoral system, but it does show what matters to people in the popular vote. And I think that the parties probably would sway their policies based on what the popular vote tells them. Because if people don't agree with what they're going to throw at you as their policies, then they're not going to vote. So I think.
You make a statement with your vote.
Yeah.
Where will you be election night?
I was, I guess, planning to probably be at home and watching the results. I'm not sure.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in to see us today, and I'm taking away two big points, maybe, well, more than two, but one is, I've heard you say many times, we only have one planet. And I think that's really resonates with people, how you talk about it. And when you say nothing is impossible, I believe it when I'm with you. I really think you offer a lot of perspective, and you've been a real asset and a joy to have in this campaign. So we wish you well, and we hope you'll come back and see us again. Thank you, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks.
That is Nicholas Wendler, who's running for the Green Party here in Huron-Bruce. We're here at the station, Goderich, and I've had the opportunity to have Tony McQuail, the candidate for the New Democratic Party, pop in and visit with us. Tony, thanks for taking some time this afternoon to be with us.
That's my pleasure, Roz.
Tony, you are an icon in Huron-Bruce. You have, I know I'm probably flattering you, but you have run, you're no stranger to politics. You have run 5 times for the federal, twice for the provincial, and you've served in the municipality as well.
Yes, I was a school board trustee for 3 terms.
Where do you get your energy?
Good food.
Good food. Well, you should know something about that.
But I guess, Roz, the thing that first got me involved in politics was I was involved in farm organizations. I had been involved in the Federation of Agriculture, and in the late 70s we were struggling with crippling high interest rates. When interest rates get above 20%, your debt doubles every 3.5 years.
Right.
And so I was trying to figure out what was going on, because I'd watched the Liberals and Conservatives basically trade speeches when they traded places in the House. When they were in opposition, high interest rates were terrible for everybody. But when they were in government, well, we just had to have them to fight inflation. And I couldn't figure it out. And two things happened. First, the NDP was saying, hey, this inflation is caused by the quadrupling of oil prices during the Arab oil embargo. You don't fight that kind of inflation with interest rates. You fight it with energy conservation and making a shift to renewable, which made a lot of sense to me, because we'd seen the Arab oil embargo, so we built a passive solar home in the 70s. We were trying to structure our farm to be very energy efficient and not use much energy. And so that made a lot of sense to me. And then Maclean's came out with an article that said, where do the parties get their money? And the Royal Bank was given $50,000 to the Liberals and $50,000 to the Tories. And the Bank of Montreal was the same amount, 50, that 50. And Nova Scotia was 25, 25. Oh, now I understand why high interest rates are so necessary.
Right. They're
not doing any good to the working economy, the place where people actually produce something, but they sure are making the rich richer.
So that's what drew you to the NDP originally.
That was it, that sense. Well, the two things. First, the willingness to take on the unfairness in society, and second, the interest in much more ecologically appropriate responses to problems.
We're gonna zero in a little bit on your platform in a second, but before I do, I just wanted to circle a bit. As you're out on the road talking to people, what feedback are you getting about this particular election?
Well, I picked 3 words to sort of define why I got involved again, and that was representation, regeneration, and redistribution. And what I find really remarkable is almost anyone you talk to, they nod on at least 2 of those 3 and are going, yeah, right. And so often they're on all 3 of them. And so people are concerned, much more concerned about the environment than they were 40 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, we're kind of doing all right, but when they look to the future, they don't like what they see. You know, they see really big problems, and they're also really disillusioned with the kind of bickering that they've seen and the kind of questionable ethics of people in high places, and not just south of the border. I mean, the failure to deliver on promises like electoral reform, the buying a pipeline instead of putting that money into things that would have benefited people across as opposed to a company trying to sell an oil pipeline. And the SNC scandal and the treatment of the Attorney General are all things that weigh on people that don't feel good. And so those are things of concern to people.
Well, let's pick away a little bit
Okay.
here. I'm going to unpack some of this with you. You just raised the environment. And it feels like today, and I know this has been something for you for 45 years at least. This is Tony.
Yep.
This is who you are. And arguably, people would say that the NDP has largely been a proponent for a long, long time. It feels like all the cool kids are doing this now. The environment's on everyone's platform. How is the NDP different, or how do you distinguish it?
Well, first I would say track record. Second, I would say it's great to talk about it. They talked about it in 2015, but what did they do about it? And you know, to me, the tragedy is if we'd been working on this really seriously in terms of thinking about renewable energy and efficiency in society, back starting in 1980, we'd be in a very different position than we are today. We're now in a position where we have to respond much more dramatically and urgently than we would have if we started to redirect the ship of state when I first ran. But the other thing I would say is one of the places where we very clearly differ from everybody else is we're not talking about tax cuts. We're talking about keeping taxes where they are for the ordinary people and raising them, particularly for the ultra wealthy. And for corporations, rolling the corporation tax breaks that Stephen Harper gave back to the 2010 levels. Because our economy has been structured and our tax system has been structured so that the wealth that we all help create, and whether you're working in Tim Hortons or you're working in a garage or you're working on, we all help create the wealth that flows through society. But the bulk of it has been going up the ladder, not being spread around. And my dad used to say, money's like manure, it does the most good when you spread it around. And he was an accountant, he wasn't a farmer, but he loved to garden. But we need a trickle-up theory, because the trickle-down stopped working when the rich factory owner no longer lived in town and spent their extra money in town. Trickle-down stopped working.
So is this what you mean by redistribution then? Is this
That's right.
that one R we're talking about right now?
That's my third R,
Okay.
is redistribution, and that's the need to say, okay, we're going to build a fairer economy, and we're going to ensure that we have a redistributive economy so that the wealth that we create gets spread out amongst us. And things like our pharmacare program, the dental care program, child care, post-secondary education, are all ways that then you take that money and you make it so that it helps virtually everybody across the economy and community. And so that I think is a significant difference. And it also means, because we're talking about stopping the subsidies that the oil companies are getting, going after the folks who are taking money off to tax havens, and dealing with speculation in the real estate market, and particularly money laundering in the real estate market. Those are all places that you also then get more money to put into the collective needs of the society.
Well, then let's turn to another R.
Okay.
And this one I might need a little help understanding a bit better. And we're going to end on probably one of my favorites.
Okay.
Talk to me about rejuvenation. We talk, because here's one thing that has come up with debates, housing needs and things. So it strikes me that we're talking about rejuvenation in Huron-Bruce. What does that look like?
Well, and actually, the word is regeneration.
Regeneration.
So it has both an ecological and a social
Okay.
aspect. Regeneration, when we're talking ecologically, is about creating a healthier ecosystem, and in agriculture in particular, as a farmer, we have an incredible opportunity, if we'll get on with it, which is to redesign how we manage our farm systems so that instead of losing soil organic matter, which also puts carbon dioxide up in the air, we start managing it so we're taking the sunlight through photosynthesis, trapping carbon, and putting it back down into the soil, increasing soil organic matter, which is sequestering carbon dioxide. Also then creates a soil that is much more porous and much more able to absorb water. And they suggest that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, you can hold another 20 to 25,000 gallons of water per acre. And what that means is if you've got a heavy rainfall event, which is what we're expecting with climate change, you've got more water that's going to get down into the soil and less flooding damage in the watersheds that do this kind of regenerative agriculture. And in addition, if you also then get more droughty periods, which is also what we expect, heavy rainfall and lack of it, and that was certainly our experience this spring. It was a terrible wet, cold spring, and then it shifted to a hot, dry end of June, July, and August when we practically got nothing.
And a lot of people had difficulty getting their crops in.
They had difficulty getting their crops in, and then the crops had difficulty growing if they were short of water. But if you've captured the water when it comes and held it in the soil, then you're much more able to withstand drought. So it creates a much more resilient agriculture. So that's regeneration at the sort of ecological level, and it can apply well beyond farming. But then regeneration at the social level and the sort of community level is rebuilding the housing stock. So we're talking about building 500,000 new housing units over 10 years, but also retrofitting and fixing things so that they aren't as costly to heat, and so that the cost savings can be used to pay for the cost of renovating. And there are also certainly things that you can do in terms of the sort of social dynamic and social structure to regenerate your society. And I should show your viewers this book, Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. Is a great little book, because in the first chapter she talks about how our modern economics got so divorced from ecological reality, social reality, and unfortunately even economic reality. So it's taking us to places we maybe shouldn't be going and are going to be hurting ourselves in. But then she talks about her donut, which is on the outer level is the outer ring of her donut are all the ecological boundaries we better not go beyond. Things like level of air pollution you can handle, carbon dioxide, plastic in the water, all these sorts of things. And the inner one are the social foundation that we better not fall below in terms of housing and food and healthcare and those kinds of things.
So a great read.
So it's a wonderful
Donut Economics.
Donut Economics, and she talks specifically in one chapter about how to design a regenerative and redistributive economy.
Well,
and I've got 6 copies because after reading it from the library, I went out and bought 6 so I could loan them to people.
Can I be on your list?
Yeah, you can. Let's see. We might even have
we
have a card in here. I can loan this one to you.
I didn't know this would turn into a book club.
There
This
you
is
go.
fantastic. I want to take our last minute or so and focus on your other R, which I find fascinating, and it's about representation. And help average people understand. I've heard people who didn't actually appreciate or know that the vote didn't count, so to speak.
Yeah.
Explain how that works, and
Sure.
in maybe a minute or less, what are we going to do about that from your perspective?
Well, our current political system, which is called first past the post, was designed when only rich men got to vote, when only the 1% really had a say, and often there were just 2 parties sort of warring over who got to get the most. But it's great if you only have 2, because then somebody gets significantly more or gets a majority position. But as soon as you become a multi-party system, it's a terrible way to select a representative body, because what happens is in this riding with 5 candidates running, if it were divided up evenly, somebody with 22% support could end up being the representative, and all those other votes don't get any representation. And it's, to me, having been involved in this for so long, it's tragic. If the Conservatives win this time, all the work of the Liberals basically go down the drain, as do the New Democrats. We don't get any representation. Most modern democracies use something called proportional representation, and there are several ways of structuring it. In Ontario, we had a citizens' assembly that came up with a brilliant approach back in 2007, but the Liberal premier of the day kind of torpedoed it by not letting them explain it when we were in the election. They didn't reprint the document that they produced. But the idea there is that each party ends up with seats proportional to their popular vote. And in a mixed member system, you can probably vote for your local person, and so pick who's felt to be best there, but also vote for the party. And then there are different ways of selecting the people who maybe make up seats if they didn't get enough in the regular system. But it's pretty simple. If you get 20% of the vote, you get 20% of the seats. If you get 40% of the vote, but you don't get 55% of the seats with 39% of the vote and 100% control of the legislature or the parliament. And so what it does is it forces parties to work together, and it forces them to figure out what the majority of Canadians or majority of Ontarians actually want. So it creates a much more stable movement of the political process, because you don't have this policy lurch when 39% have 100% control on this side, and then 39% say, no, we don't like what you did, and we're going to differentiate ourselves. And it's not a good way to run a modern democracy. And the tragedy is, in 2015, over 9 million Canadians, over half the voters, cast votes that didn't earn any representation. And we're going to be looking at the same thing this election, because Trudeau did not keep his promise. And for him to say there was no consensus is just, well, silly, much worse than silly. It's I think, very cynical, because 88% of the expert witnesses that testified at the committee hearing said, proportional, some form of proportional is the way to go. They weren't tasked with designing the system. They were just tasked to say, how could we do this better? And they came back. 87% of the public submission said, we need a proportional system. Man, in politics, I've been in school board, I worked for the Minister of Agriculture. If you had that kind of support for an idea, you would be dancing. And to say, oh, there wasn't enough consensus and my preferred system didn't get, his preferred system isn't a proportional system. Preferential ballot is not. It's a great way to select one person for a leader of a party or a chairman of a board or a civic association. But if you want a representative body, you need people's first choices to count toward representation. And that's why proportional is
And you've been very passionate about that. I would think that that's one that's really stood out for me, that you've really been raising the flag on.
Yeah, well, I think we were terribly misserved by Justin Trudeau. I think he was very cynical in 2015. He was trying to pull Green voters, NDP voters, Conservative voters in staunch Liberal or NDP ridings who'd watch their votes disappear every election, get cast, and nothing come from it. And so he said, trust me for this one, just give me your vote. And he got this swell of support that came his way. I suspect it's not going to go that way this time.
Let me end with this, a couple quick questions, a little lightning round if you
well,
want.
let me say one more thing.
Okay, we'll give you one more.
In terms of representation, in our platform, we are saying we should lower the voting age to 16.
Okay.
Because those kids are the ones who are going to have the most of their lives affected by the decisions we're making now. And if you're old enough to drive a car, old enough to work, old enough to pay taxes, shouldn't you have a say in who represents you? In addition to which, if you start voting at that age, you're much more likely to be voting in your home community, where you know where to go to vote, you have a little better understanding of the people, you even have friends and family you can talk to about it. Whereas if you're off at university or off at work somewhere else when you first are eligible to vote, it's a lot less likely that you'll have the sort of cues that help you get to your polling booth on the first time you're eligible.
That's a really interesting insight, and I know the youth have been very passionate this election cycle and have really showed up a lot. So it'd be interesting to see how they vote this time and how they come out. They'll be part of our analysis as we unpack this. When you look out, there's a little bit of time left. We'll be broadcasting this interview before and after and during the night of the election. One last thought, Tony. What are you most proud of that you've brought to this election cycle?
Well, I think a clarity that this is not a two-party race.
Okay.
That's the way the old line parties have always talked about it. Don't waste your vote. Don't waste. Well, if you don't vote for what you believe in, you have surely wasted your vote. So if you don't believe in what we're talking about in the NDP, don't vote for us. But if you do, you should. And if you've never voted before, or if you've given up on voting because your vote never counts on election night, this would be a really good election to go back and try again. Because what I'm finding on the street is people are tired of the same old, same old. And one of the things I point out to them is, the Liberals and Conservatives have been serving the 1% since Confederation. Because at that time, only the 1% got the vote. You had to be a wealthy, propertied man to vote up until the end of the First World War, which was when women got the vote and when working people got the vote, and when Canada became a multi-party system, because the political movements that the NDP traces back to are the United Farmers and the Independent Labor folks who got going at that time. Then in the Depression, they coalesced into the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, and then in the 60s became the NDP. So Elizabeth May always tries to lump us in as one of the old line parties, but in fact, I would say the NDP has been the frontline party on behalf of ordinary working people, and since its inception. And if you look at where our healthcare system came from, our pensions came from, a bunch of environmental protections came from, they often trace back to a time when we held the balance of power and pioneered ideas and brought them forward and into the discourse, and got accepted because the old line parties, the Liberals and Conservatives, were scared of the popularity that was growing. But you don't have to go with them. I'm finding on the street that people were very impressed with Jagmeet Singh during the leaders' debate.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah. This will be our final.
And
what's the impression? Yeah, what's the impression?
What they said, a couple of people said, well, he was the only one who acted like an adult.
Okay.
And I mean, he's got a good sense of humor. He's a caring person, and he's got some pretty clear convictions and an understanding that if we're going to change things, we actually have to make different choices. We can't just talk about it before and during an election and then forget about it afterwards. So, the fiscal stuff we're talking about in terms of collecting the taxes that the wealthy owe and not letting them shift it off to tax havens and putting a 1% wealth tax is what you need to do to have resources to then do these other things that will benefit across society.
Well, Tony, you've brought a lot to me today. I couldn't be more thrilled that you popped in and spent some time with us and put us on your travel plans today, because I know we always try to kind of watch our carbon footprint. We'll be following you election night. Don't be surprised if we have a pop-in visit. And I just want to again thank you and the best of luck, and thank you for sharing your story with our viewers. It is so important to us that everyone has an opportunity to get their message out in your way, and you bring such wonderful color and expression to it, so thank you for that.
Well, let me share one more thing with folks, if you can. This is a little summary I did for the climate strike and have been giving out. It's a summary of a paper I wrote 10 years ago called Do We Love Our Machines More Than Our Children? If people would like, if they email me, I'd be happy to send them both either the summary or the full document. But I think that's the question we have to grapple with as we look at where we are in the environment at the moment. I think we can be very creative and figure out ways to use our machines a great deal less and still have a lot more joy and time for family, time for friends. But we are going to have to make some very serious changes, whether we want to or not. If we do it with planning and creativity, we'll get to a good place. If we dig in our heels and say, no, we're not going to change, we're going to change, because this is where I get to use my...
Tony, you brought with you a bit of a prop. I want you to step back here and describe for me what you have. It's called the economic cake chart. It looks indeed like a cake. I see nature at the bottom, family, community, public, private. What am I looking at here, Tony?
It's a drawing of a very creative economist named Hazel Henderson, who said, I'm tired of economic pie charts. I want a cake chart. And so she said, what you have to understand is that each layer depends on the layers below it. So she said the first layer is nature and the ecosystem that we all too often take for granted. And then the next one is what she called the love economy, the family and community. And on top of that, you have the public sector, which is not just our physical infrastructure, but is also the rules and regulations and the ways by which we function together as a society. And on top of that is the private sector, and each layer depends on the ones below it. And that's why I say, and in my regeneration thing, if we don't start taking better care of nature, it's going to stop taking care of us, and all of this will collapse. So, I mean, we feel very fortunate on our farm. We build a passive solar home. We do a lot of our work with our own energy or with real horsepower in addition to a small tractor. And we've got photovoltaic panels that produce more power, electricity than our farm and barn uses. So we've been working in that direction. But there's so much more we could do collectively in
Right.
terms of thinking about rural transportation and being really creative there. So, to me, we've got such opportunity, but it's not going to last forever. And if we don't go now, if we don't work on it now, and that whole cake collapses, it ain't going to be a fun time for our kids or our grandkids.
Right.
And that's part of why I ran, was concerned for their future.
Well, I appreciate the way that you're able to put things in perspective like that. The cake chart, we got a book suggestion. I mean, what a fulsome time together to really explore. And again, thank you for just adding a lot of perspective to this discussion. And we'll be looking out to you again on election night. And wish you best of luck in the remaining few days. And don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Okay, well, let me also show your camera this picture, because we don't want Huron County to look like that.
Conquest of land through 7,000 years.
And it's a record by a USDA agriculture soil scientist who toured around to cradles of civilization where you have these abandoned buildings in deserts.
Right.
And that's because they didn't look after the bottom layer of the cake chart. And the problem is, they were local issues. With a global economy now, we can eat the planet, and that's a very worrying thing.
Well,
happy ideas.
happy ideas there, Tony. Happy ideas.
But the happy idea is we ain't too late. As Tommy Douglas used to say, it's not too late to build a better world. It's just getting that we don't have a whole lot of time left.
Thank you, Tony. That was Tony McQuail. We spent an interesting few minutes chatting, the candidate for the New Democrat Party here in Huron-Bruce. I'm joined with Alan Thompson, the candidate for the Liberal Party here for Huron-Bruce. Alan, thank you for being with us this evening.
Happy to be here, Roz.
Alan, you're no stranger to Huron-Bruce. I understand you grew up in Glamis on a family farm?
Yes, the little hamlet of Glamis.
How nostalgic.
It's about 10 miles in from Tiverton.
Okay.
So I grew up on a family farm right on the edge of the village, and my dad was growing up on a family farm right across the road.
Really?
That's where my grandpa and grandma lived. So the Thompsons had been around the area since the late 1800s.
What did you farm?
It was a mixed farm,
Yeah.
feeder cattle, pigs, and by today's standards, pretty small operation.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, at one point, I think Dad had 600 or 700 acres, but he was also the typical pattern of kind of building up farms that his children might take over. So my brothers did farm for a while. I didn't. I mean, it was an amazing place to grow up. I am so glad that I was able to grow up on a farm. And it was fairly evident, I think, early on that I wasn't going to stay farming, but I enjoyed it. And I would go back often in the summers. Even while I was at university, I was back home for a couple summers. And then all through my adult life, my dad farmed into his mid-70s. Wow. So all through my adult life, I would be back and forth a lot, back to the family farm, because we still had, believe it or not, monthly birthday parties for everyone.
Wow. Yeah.
In the family. We still do this. And Christmases and Easter and all the big occasions.
So Bruce County is home to you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was always a big part of my life. So when I decided to run, I actually contemplated running in the early 90s.
Oh, really?
In the 93 election that Chrétien won.
Mm-hmm.
I had some contact with the local Liberal Party and thought about it, and then in the end decided to stay in journalism for a while longer, and ultimately in 2013 or so, really it was when Justin Trudeau ran for the leadership of the Liberal Party, decided this is the time and that I would run.
And you call Goderich home now?
Yeah, so I have a home in Goderich on Market Street,
Yeah.
just
By the
off
library,
square.
by the
Right
library.
around the corner from
Yeah,
the library, just
yeah.
off the square. It's a great spot.
That's a great spot for a journalist to live, close to a
Yeah.
library. So you were a journalist at Toronto Star?
Yeah, so I studied journalism at Carleton. That's where I went to university, and then worked my summers here back home.
Okay.
I worked at the Kincardine Independent, the Teeswater News. Sadly, the Teeswater News is no
Yeah.
longer in business, but the Kincardine Independent is.
So you've covered local issues.
Oh, definitely. Did that
Yeah.
for 2 summers. Then I worked at the London Free Press for a summer.
Oh.
And then went off to the Toronto Star initially as a summer student and just kind of stayed. And I was there for almost 20 years.
Wow. What type of things did you cover?
In Toronto, the first 7 years I was in Toronto, I covered agriculture and agri-food in the business section. I covered immigration as a beat reporter for the Star. And then in 1994, after the Chrétien government had been elected, I moved up to Ottawa. So I spent really the bulk of my career as a political reporter on Parliament Hill.
Wow, so you really have seen the basis, you've seen the inside of Ottawa and really know what makes it tick.
Yeah, I spent
Yeah.
about a decade on Parliament Hill. And in those days, print journalism was flourishing. So that job meant I traveled all across the country with the Prime Minister when he would traveled around the world, did Africa tours 2 or 3 times, Europe, and did a lot of reporting for the Star. I was never based abroad as a foreign correspondent, but I did do some foreign stints for the Star in Rwanda, in Somalia, in Sierra Leone, in Russia at one
And you
point.
wrote a book.
Yeah, and I've done a couple books on media and the Rwanda genocide. That's sort of my research area. Because after my time at the Star, I took up a teaching position at Carleton University as a journalism prof. And now I've been on sort of extended leaves while I've been running for office and when I moved back home.
So a couple things here, Alan. You've been on the other side of following elections and reporting upon them, and now you're on the other side running. How is that different for you?
Well, it's a bit of a mind bender when you're being scrummed at debates or at other events. It's a reminder, I think we need to tell rural stories better. I like the journalists that I deal with here. I think they're really good at what they do. They work very, very hard with limited resources. But I do think we need more. And this is why this is kind of cool, because we don't see our own community on television. It's astonishing to me that we have really the larger community of 100,000 or so people who do not see themselves on television. They see their community through urban eyes, right? They show up on the TV news when a city TV station decides to tell a story.
And you've talked about that quite a bit, about why you've chosen to run a second time here in Huron-Bruce. 2015 wasn't enough for you. Some people would say you've never stopped running. You've been out there still listening to people. Is that the draw, that rural issues come to the forefront for you?
Yeah, after the 2015 election, and if people remember, the electoral map was pretty red in Ontario, except for a swath of southwestern Ontario that stayed conservative. And I made a case to the Liberal Party, you know, this is really important. We are not apparently connecting with a number of rural ridings, and those voices aren't being heard in the corridors of power in Ottawa. We need to wrap our heads around that. So they asked me to lead a commission, a task force, that looked at rural ridings and the way the party was interacting and connecting, and how that could be done better. And a few things, whether there was a cause effect, a few things happened after that study. The Prime Minister did attend the ploughing match in Walton, and it was the first time in decades a sitting Prime Minister had been at the ploughing match. They created the Ministry of Rural Economic Development, a full cabinet position, and I think it has made a big difference. The current party platform has a lot that speaks to people who live in rural communities and small towns.
So your job is really to translate that and say how the Liberal Party could benefit Huron-Bruce constituents. Let's talk about some of the different factors that people are telling you about as you walk around and knock on doors. What are some of the things that really resonate? What are people really concerned about?
Well, what I find most striking knocking on doors, and it's a bit invasive, right? It's quite surprising that we don't get more people who sort of slam the door and say, go away.
Yeah.
That happens very seldom. So it's a bit invasive. You're on somebody's porch, you're at their door, and you are in their space. And very quickly, you are struck by the enormous gap between rich and poor in this riding. And I think it's something that's really telling. So we're quite fortunate. The sort of idyllic small town life, you know, people think of good homes, agriculture, you know, food on the table, fresh air. And yet a lot of the homes that you visit, people are really struggling to get by. And, you know, sometimes it's older people, seniors, who are really preoccupied about affordability and cost of living. And for them, a fixed income means I remember a woman in Wingham that I was speaking with. She was literally at her table right then with an envelope, calculating her monthly input and her monthly expenses. And she took me through it. She said, "It's interesting that you're here. This is my life. This is what I'm dealing with." But then at the other end of the age spectrum, you get younger people who are also struggling.
Right.
And who want to make a start in life and who want to get out on their own, get out and have a home. And housing is just not affordable, right? So we have lovely homes in towns like Goderich, but not very much affordable housing. And yet our economy is booming. We have the lowest unemployment in decades in Huron-Bruce. Job shortages everywhere. Employers of all kinds struggling to fill positions. And yet you run into these people who they can't afford to live in the place where the job is. And the place where they can afford to live, they have no transportation.
Right.
They can't get to the larger centers to get to a job. So you do have this kind of trio of issues, and especially housing and the complete lack of transportation other than personal vehicles. So we have no transit.
And you think about, let's talk about the youth for a second. We hear about student loans.
Yeah.
Somewhere on the 15-year plan to pay those off. OSAP has been cut back, various things on the provincial level. So that group is really feeling challenged. And daycare is another things that people talk about locally. And again, that's not necessarily federal, but I understand the child care benefit has been released.
So the Canada Child Benefit is huge.
Right.
And a lot of people think, oh, well, we always had the baby bonus. But this was a really new initiative from the Trudeau government. So the Harper government had a child tax credit, and the Conservative Party is much more into tax credits. So you might get some benefit back later on your taxes, which presumes you're paying taxes. And it usually favors people who are in higher income brackets. So the Canada Child Benefit does not go to people in higher income brackets. They don't get it, period.
Okay.
And they don't claim it back on their taxes. They're not getting that benefit. All of those funds, and this means more money is available to go to people in lower incomes. And we're proposing to increase that benefit, especially for people who have children under 1. Because everything, you make choices in government, and in this case, choices about what you would do in another term in government. And I think at every turn you will see this in the Liberal platform. We're trying to make choices to direct resources to the people who really need it the most. And in an election where everybody thinks it's all just a muddle, they watch that first debate and they kind of get annoyed at people shouting over top of each other. I do think people have to realize there are really diverging choices on the table in this election. And when you can wade through the talking points, we had 8 debates. And unless you were listening very, very closely in those debates, you might think we're all sort of talking about the same thing, talking about cutting taxes and getting more money to seniors, more money to health care. But a huge difference, when the Conservative Party talks about cutting taxes, they will cut taxes for the wealthy, as well as people in middle and lower incomes. And the Liberal Party is very clear. No, we are not cutting taxes for the wealthy, for the 1%. If anything, their taxes will go up.
What are some of the other differences?
I think in the approach to climate change is an enormous, there's a real gulf between really the progressive parties, the Liberals, the NDP and the Greens, and the Conservatives. And the fundamental difference is we believe very strongly that the time has come. We have to put a price on carbon. There has to be a price to pay if you are going to pollute. And that's a fundamental aspect of our climate change policy. In addition to pouring billions of dollars into trying to develop alternative technologies and green technology, giving companies a break on their taxes if they will develop green technology. And the Conservatives say very clearly on their first day in office, they will repeal what they call the carbon tax. And you're hard pressed to find an economist who thinks that's a good idea. There's almost unanimity that putting a price on carbon works.
Well, let me ask you it this way. If I'm here in Huron-Bruce, how do you tell someone why a carbon tax makes sense. How do you explain it in a way that makes sense to people?
I mean, I think it creates an incentive for good behavior.
Okay.
I make a parallel. It's not a precise one, but I tell people or ask them, when is the last time you threw a case of empty beer bottles in the garbage?
Right.
And they kind of shake their head like, well, no, we don't do that.
We don't do that in Canada.
We take them back to the beer store. So you've paid a price. You paid a deposit on those bottles, and you get it back.
Right.
And it rewards you for doing the right thing, and the bottles are reused and multiple times. And carbon tax is same concept. 9 out of 10 people, and the research on this is very, very clear. 9 out of 10 Canadians get more money back on their taxes than they paid at the gas pump. And I think it's a responsible, fair way to sort of create an incentive for people trying to use less fuel, use less fossil fuels, put less carbon into the atmosphere.
Isn't it remarkable to think that climate change has risen to one of the top concerns and issues here across the board, when probably in 1993, when you were considering running, and even in 2015, by contrast, it wasn't at the same level. There's just a real keen emphasis across all lines that you wouldn't have seen before.
Well, the research is just so, if you believe in science,
Right.
the research is very, very clear.
And you've talked to the youth, you've been out visiting Exeter, I understand?
Yeah, there's a group, Eco Exeter,
Right.
in the high school there. Most high schools have this kind of initiative where students are trying to figure out how can they do the right thing in their communities. But, you know, we did, in the 90s, Canada had an argument with Ronald Reagan over acid rain, you know,
I
another
remember that.
environmental issue.
Yeah.
We argued about it. They didn't think it was caused by human behavior. And we won that argument, and we have reduced acid rain dramatically by trying to do the right thing, by taking steps. So it can be done, but we have to start now. And we have to get people directly involved and to be aware and to be willing to contribute.
I can't believe I haven't heard acid rain in a couple decades. You're
Yeah,
right, that
yeah.
was the issue of the day. I remember being concerned going outside, wondering what is this? So
Yeah.
what a backwalk there. Let's talk about some of the other issues. What's really else resonating as you're out and around in Huron-Bruce?
I mean, I do find, like a general sense, a lot of people who live in Huron-Bruce are sort of annoyed that they see decisions being made in the city. You know, that most of the decision making is driven by urban centers. And I think there's a political reality to that. The sort of sense of gravity is around big centers like Toronto. But you look at an issue like transit. So yes, of course, transit is a good thing.
I do. And welcome to live coverage of Decision 2019 Huron-Bruce. We are broadcasting live on Hay Communications and Huron-Tel, and also streaming live on Facebook at The Stage, where we are here tonight in our very own studio and setup. Paul Steckley has joined me, and Paul, of course, the former MP for Huron-Bruce. Happy election night, Paul.
Thank you, and happy election night to you and to everyone who's listening tonight
It
and
feels like
watching.
Christmas, doesn't it?
Without Santa Claus.
Well, someone's in for something good and someone's in for some coal, I think,
I'm
right?
afraid so.
I'm afraid
yes,
four are going to
yes.
feel some coal, right? Well, it is a real honor and a pleasure to have you join us tonight, Paul, for so many reasons, but the least of which is I think so many people just not the least of which is that people just want to thank you for your service. You have been such an icon and have left such a legacy in Huron-Bruce that it is wonderful to have your perspective and share it with us as we talk to all the candidates and just follow all the results tonight. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, let me tell you a little bit of what is in store for you tonight. So we've done a lot of work getting this ready, and I will tell you, people will be watching on CTV and Global and CBC, and that's terrific. They're going to see the federal scope. We are here at the stage bringing unique and dedicated coverage of Huron-Bruce.
That's wonderful.
And it's never been done before like this. We have interviewed every single candidate.
Wonderful.
And we're going to show some clips, and I want you to comment on those. We're going to profile the riding, what we should be looking for, some of the stats, some of the major issues that polled here. We're going to have candidates comment on those issues. We even think some candidates might come in tonight and drop in or Skype in. So we're going to get a chance to put them on the hot seat again.
I'm looking forward to that.
And you're the man to do
Yeah,
that.
okay.
We are going to have other guests pop in. We also went out on the street and did some interviews before the election. And we chatted to some people, Paul, who were undecided. So we're going to show some of those as well tonight. So lots of clips, lots of different things, lots to talk with you about. So I hope you're up for it. I hope you ate your Wheaties.
Ate them this morning.
Did
but,
you?
They're still with me.
They're still with you. And we are joined by your lovely wife, Kathy,
Yes.
right now. She's in our green room watching.
Yes,
and
she's here with us tonight.
we're
yes.
pleased to have Kathy join us. Now, this, of course, is not unfamiliar ground for Kathy to be with you on election night watching results come in.
That's right.
Yeah. What's it like for people, you know, the closing hours as we get close to the polls close? How's it feel?
It feels almost as good as the Saturday night before the election, when you finally say, I've run my last mile,
Yeah.
and now it's in the hands of the people.
Yeah.
And I remember one election on the Saturday night, we went to a country music concert in London. And there was I felt so relaxed and away from it. And I thoroughly enjoyed that evening. But sitting around in our living room as we did the first night in 1993, the night of the November 25th election, we had family there, we had some friends, we had a house full of people.
Wow.
And while I was always optimistic about the outcome, one is never certain about an election until the last vote is counted. And I felt going into that evening that we were on good ground to win the election. And we did, but so I didn't go into that with the apprehension of what it must be like to lose. I had done a number of elections through my municipal career and becoming warden. This was all involving elections. And I was always successful. And I didn't plan on being unsuccessful in my first attempt.
Right.
And I worked hard.
Yeah.
And the people rewarded my diligence.
It is hard work, isn't it?
Very hard work, and that's why we, at some point in time, say we've had enough.
Yeah.
We just can't. Our bodies just don't
It's
function the way they at one time did.
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks, plenty, right, for everybody.
Yeah. We had a long election in one of them, and I believe it was the second last one. It was 60 days or something like that, and it was just forever. And I said I would probably never run another one. I think I ran one more after that.
I think that's the one that Ben ran his first campaign, Ben Lobb, against you.
Ben ran against me in 2006.
That's right. And that was a late night, as Ben shared with me.
Yes.
At one point, he thought it was turning his direction, and at the very end, it turned.
Yeah, he was up 12 votes on me at one point, and for the first time in my life, in an election, I felt that I might finally have come to the end of my road. But Bruce came to my rescue.
Good
and
old
they
Bruce.
bailed me out. They bailed me out with almost 1,000 votes.
We'll talk about some of the areas later on that we'll be watching that might bail some people out or need to show up for people to kind of turn in the support that they're expecting. So we're going to analyze that a little bit later. So you have a lot of empathy for these candidates across the board.
I do. Anyone who presents themselves to the public for public office, just the very fact that they allowed their name to go on a ballot.
Yeah.
And jogged from one house to another and met people at all candidates meetings and in all kinds of dinners and functions where people gather. That's hard work.
Yeah, you have to be on.
You have to be on.
And
that's
sincere.
Right. And you're not always as on as you'd like to be.
Well, you get tired, you get even a
tired.
cold, I would imagine, and yeah, all those
Yeah.
good things, right? Well, how would you like if we share with our viewers some clips of each of the candidates and kind of remind people who the 5 candidates are running in Huron-Bruce, and we'll pause after each one and just maybe chat about them for a little bit.
Sure.
I thought we'd begin with our incumbent. And our incumbent, of course, is Ben Laub that we
Yes.
just spoke about. He first ran against you and narrowly lost. He gave you a bit of a
He
run
gave me
for
quite
it.
a tussle.
And then he was elected after you retired, right?
Yes, he
In
was.
2008.
2008, yes.
2008. And again, that was a pretty good one. He swept in. He was quite young at the time, 32. 32. So he served 3 times, and now he's looking to earn his 4th. And you served how many terms, Paul?
5 terms.
5 terms. We seem to love our long relationships with our members of parliament.
We have developed a history of that. Jack Riddle was there for 17 years.
Wow.
Carol Mitchell was there for
Yes.
less time than that, and we've had other members that have only served 2 terms.
So that's still pretty
But,
good.
we have not had anyone serve as long as Jack for a long time.
Yeah.
Not Murray, but Elson Cardiff.
yeah,
Elson Cardiff, prior to Murray Cardiff, was there quite a long time.
So we seem to have a monogamous serial relationship with our MPs, it seems.
Yeah, and
We
it
love
seems
them.
that relationship is monogamous with, sort of identifies most often with the Conservative Party.
So we'll see what happens
Yeah,
tonight.
We'll see what happens tonight.
Well, we're going to quickly show a clip of Ben. We'll talk about that. And I've actually got word, this is a special surprise, Alan Thompson is in the house. So in a few minutes, we're going to turn to Alan and we're going to have him sit with us.
Oh, wonderful.
What a thrill that'll be.
Wonderful.
So let's start out by introducing Ben Laub. We'll show a clip and then we'll just chat about it for a couple seconds. So here we go, Ben Laub.
It is unlike any other place really in North America, maybe the world,
Yeah.
and it's so beautiful. Anybody that's grown up here, lived here, worked here, spent any time here knows it's so unique with the rolling hills, tremendous
Yeah.
soil and land and the crops that we have here, and then of course the lake, and everything about it is unique and beautiful and natural, and I think we're all happy to be here and proud to say that we're from Huron-Bruce County.
I get you, I get you. Now, you have proudly served in Huron-Bruce for 3 terms.
That's
And you're
correct.
now seeking your 4th term.
That is correct.
That's
yes.
a long service career.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and proud to serve.
Yeah.
And love the people, love the residents here in Huron-Bruce County, and that's really been our focus since 2008. And really, when I ran for the first time in 2005, was to try and do the best job we could to serve the people in Huron-Bruce. And whether it's at our constituency office in Goderich or Port Elgin, or advocate on their behalf in Ottawa, and really be able to deliver their message in a positive way to try and affect change.
So there we have it. We saw Ben, our incumbent, and look who showed up while Ben was playing. You just can't get off his tail, can you? Welcome, Alan.
Hi, Ross. How are you? And
Well-
hello, Paul.
Welcome, Al.
We
Nice to
are.
have you here.
When's the last time you two saw each other?
Oh, a few days ago, I think,
Yeah.
out on the
Probably a
campaign
week ago,
trail.
yeah.
Crisscrossed?
Paul's been working hard on my campaign.
Did he share any secrets with you? Any wisdom?
Many.
Yeah. What stands
Many.
out for you?
Be out there in the community talking to people.
Yeah. It's our sage wisdom right here, isn't it?
Once a day, almost, I would hear people talk about Paul.
Really?
And often people who haven't voted Liberal in a while
Yeah.
would say, I voted for Paul Steckley because he stood up for his community and stood up for what he believes in.
Yeah. How does that feel, Paul?
Well, it feels good, and I'm reminded as I shop in the Goderich area, particularly because I had my office here, that people haven't forgotten. And there's a good feeling about that. Not that I boast about it, but it's nice to be remembered, and to be remembered fondly.
Yeah.
And so I'm hearing this, but in case people get thoughts about me coming back, I said, I'm leaving that to another generation of politicians.
All right.
Well, he's got 2 new knees now, so he's ready to go.
He's ready to
So
go.
I have 2 new knees, but I still want to be able to run along with the crowd.
And I think Kathy keeps you pretty busy
Yeah,
too.
very much so.
And you know, when I called to invite Paul on the program, he was mowing 3 acres of lawn. So he's a busy guy. He's an
Doesn't
active
surprise
guy.
me.
Yeah, you could do it, Paul. I'm pretty sure. So how's the mood tonight, Alan?
It's great. I mean, the last few days, on Saturday, I decided to do, essentially, to Main Street, the riding from bottom to top. I started in first thing in the morning down in Exeter, and then just zigzagged all the way up to Southampton. We made 17 stops. And these weren't, we didn't run in, run out. We did 17 meaningful stops in communities, in and out of stores, businesses, hair salons, just about every place where I could find people to say hello to. And the vibe was really, really positive.
Good. It's interesting. I follow everyone's Facebook page, so I get to see where you go and where Tony's been and Nick and everyone and Ben. And so yesterday I was keeping up, and I saw you stopped in Varna on Golden
Yes,
Paws.
I was thinking of you
Yes,
when I
thank
stopped
you.
in Varna.
And of course, Paul is fond of Varna as well. We're the Varna connection here tonight.
Yeah.
And I voted this morning in Varna.
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah.
the vibe was pretty, it was very social. People were in a very kind of upbeat mode. Like they were just eager and visiting, and today felt kind of like a social.
I think the voter turnout is up. This is just anecdotal, right? Because during the day, we get these bingo sheets, they call them.
Okay.
You know, every hour you get a sheet from every poll, which more or less indicates who has voted. We don't know their names. You punch the numbers into the system, and then it gives you an indication of the voters that have already been out to vote. And the last numbers that I saw, the voter turnout in Goderich was up significantly from 2015.
So a couple questions that help us maybe later on analyze some of the results, and we'll ask this of other candidates. Are there certain areas that you're looking to where, one, you would hope it comes in at a certain height and needs to come at a certain volume, and other areas that you're hoping to chip away at?
I mean, I really have been trying to reach out very respectfully to everyone sort of on the center left of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
Because I think even just the most recent polls, in many respects, there was a sort of a tie at the national level between Justin Trudeau's Liberals and Andrew Scheer. And that means, you know, elections can be funny things. There is a very real possibility of a Scheer minority government, and I think people need to be conscious of that. And I've been trying throughout the campaign to connect with people who are traditionally NDP supporters or Green supporters, and to tell them, you know, I respect your political views, I respect your political philosophy. I haven't always voted Liberal in my life. I've voted for several parties over the years. So I've been trying to reach out to people without it being kind of a crass strategic voting pitch. I tell people, you can vote for a progressive candidate to be our voice in Ottawa. And we may get down to the end of the evening where 1 or 2 seats across the country are making the decision about who forms a minority government or a majority government.
Right.
And Huron-Bruce could be one of those.
It could be.
So I really appeal, there's an hour
I know.
left.
And my understanding, and you probably have more insight, so again, we'll look for you for some of the backdrop of how all this works, kind of help people understand behind the scenes. But my understanding from talking to one of the campaigns is that the advance polls, they swore in the individuals in Kincardine and in Clinton, and that they've begun counting the advance polls at 8:15.
Yeah.
So it could be that we will hear very quickly at 9:30 from that onslaught? Because that was a huge gathering, 29% it was up, right?
Yeah, a lot of people voted in the advance.
And that will be interesting because people talk about, is that a change election, Paul, or is that people getting out the vote? Is that just Thanksgiving and people are home? So we don't know how to read that yet, but that's going to be interesting to see the advance polls.
Yeah, I voted in the advance. I voted in Goderich in the advance, and I knew a lot of the people in the lineup. And as I understand the rules, you can't talk politics in those lineups
Right.
at the voting station, so I wasn't glad-handing my way down the line, but I was looking very carefully at who was there, who was voting, what did the mood seem to be, and to me it seemed pretty upbeat. I saw a lot of people who I know are supporters of mine, or people who have told me they're supporters, but in some cases said kind of don't really tell anyone about this, but I do want to support you in this campaign. So it's hard to read what we make of the high turnout in the advance, and now I think we are seeing a much higher turnout in a community like Goderich than in 2015. And across the country in 2015, the turnout went up quite significantly. But in Goderich, it had been relatively low, less than 60%. And we're now seeing we've come in above that already in what we have seen, the data that's come in from the polling stations. So how you read that, you know, to me, it's just good news when people participate in their democracy. Because flick on the TV, look at what's happening in Lebanon. You know, people by the tens of thousands marching in the street to have the privilege of having an election like we're having.
Yeah. Hong Kong.
Hong
Yeah.
Kong.
Yeah.
Yep. So you're right. It comes back to, and later on we're going to talk a little bit about choice and reform and electoral reform. We're going to chat about that. We have clips of everyone addressing that. So, you know, it strikes me, since you're both here, it strikes me that it's looking like or signaling that we could have a minority government. Does that, in a way, provide more proportional representation, given that people are going to have to play nice together to get things done? So does it help in a way to kind of bring everyone together and get things accomplished at the national level?
I think when there's still an hour for people to go and vote, I want to caution people, you don't cast your ballot to get a minority government. You cast your ballot for the candidate that you want to support. And so I've been encouraging people, just look at the candidates who have come before you and what they've had to offer, and who's been trying to be the most constructive and setting out how you could do this job better. And I think better is always possible, and I don't think anyone should be insulted if in a debate we talk about, here's how I think this job could be done better. And anyone who aspires to that job should be able to put forward, here's some suggestions of how I think you could represent Huron-Bruce more strongly in Ottawa.
That's one of the things we talked about, is Huron-Bruce, shining a light, Paul, on Huron-Bruce. And as a rural riding, we don't always get the attention that we hope we would get, because sometimes the urban, I mean, the decisions can be made by the cities, right?
Well, they will if you allow them to.
Right.
But we don't have to sit back and allow that to happen. There were times when I had to almost push my way, shove my way to the forefront. But we were heard. And we still have a voice if we allow it to be heard. I never forget what one man, when he advised me, and he was a good friend of mine from this community, advised me in my early campaigning days what my slogan should be.
Yeah.
And he said, priority the people. And he was in the business of making signs and all kinds of election paraphernalia. And he created signs for me, and I had about 50 of them, which I still have a number of them around as souvenirs. And that was my slogan, above all other slogans that we had as a party. Priority the people. It's the people that matter. It's the people we've been elected to serve. And when you have a problem, you go to your local member, not to the leader of a federal party or the prime minister. You don't give him, send him a letter or call him. But you make it your business to get to your local member. And if your local member isn't an effective one, not willing to work hard for you, those things will stay on his desk and they'll go into the waste paper basket eventually.
Thank you, Paul. That's what it's all about, right? Like, that's why you run, right, Alan?
Well, it's been, I mean, so I've run twice now, and I've come to realize that when you're in this job, I think you should be out campaigning all the time. And I've made that commitment in seniors' homes and other places where you go to connect with people. I don't think you should only see us once every 4 years at election time. You know, I found some of those gathering places where you can go and speak to people really, really important, because they were essentially mini town halls, and to give people a chance to be heard. And I posted something last night. Most candidates have posted some sort of a, 24 hours till the election. Thanks so much to my supporters and my family. But I reflected a bit on just the experience of going around, knocking on doors, meeting people, and the kind of people that you hear from. And one thing I noted was, to those of you who spoke to me in anger, that's fine. I heard you. I actually learned from some of those people. And then others, it's just so striking the disparity between rich and poor in our community. You know, we're very fortunate. It's a very wealthy community in many respects, but once you're knocking on people's doors, when you're in their homes, you discover very quickly there are a lot of people who feel as if the world is passing them by, and they need their government to step up for them.
Yeah. So, Alan, where will you be over the next couple of hours?
So we are working out of our campaign offices both in Kincardine and in Goderich.
Okay.
We've had a number of campaign centers around the ridings and around the riding and the two main offices. So right now, there's a big team in our office on Hamilton Street. When the polls close, we will likely all be migrating over to the Legion,
Okay.
where we've set up for an evening event to watch the national results and the local results. And so that's where I plan to be with my supporters and my family.
I know someone who will be heading over there later, but while Paul was with us tonight, he shared with me he will be absolutely impartial. So he's doing his best to stay right down the middle here and not show any signals, but something tells me you'll be dropping by.
I happen to probably need a break about
Okay.
that time.
I know someone who might
I
buy
might
you
just
one.
drop in at Hamilton
Yeah.
Street. It's pretty close to my
It's
on
pretty
my way
close.
home.
It's on the way.
Yeah.
It's on the way. You
Yes.
could trip home. Well, we have another guest in that is looking forward to sharing. We're going to roll a clip of Tony McQuail. Is Tony here? Not Tony. Sorry, it's not Tony. We have. We're actually going to let's roll a clip anyway of Tony. We're going to introduce. So we're introducing all the candidates. So we didn't have to roll your clip because we got you in person. You just showed up at the perfect timing.
You can roll, you can do whatever you
We
want.
probably still could.
It's your show, and by the way, thanks for doing this.
Isn't it fun?
It's, to me, I'm a former journalist,
Yes,
and
you
I've
are.
always been struck by the fact that we don't see our community on
No.
television
No,
anymore.
we don't.
We
We
see
don't.
our community through the eyes of big city TV stations. So this is terrific to
Absolutely.
have this kind of
Sure is.
coverage and this kind of opportunity.
It is terrific. And what also has been terrific, and I was going to share this a little later, is the response by all 5 candidates has just been fantastic.
Good.
The eagerness, the responsiveness, and it is a real privilege for us here at the stage. We've gotten an opportunity to chat with everyone and really get to know the people beyond the platform. And as you said earlier, Paul, no one does this just for it takes courage and it takes passion, and you do this for service. So, our respect goes out to anyone who throws their hat in the ring. So we're really feeling wonderful that we can talk about the issues, all the time that you spent with us. And we're going to carry on, and we're going to see how late we can go tonight, Paul, before I let you go. But I might carry on, and we'll see how you do tonight.
Okay.
And don't be surprised if we ask and reach out
I've
for
got
Skype.
Skype set up on my, so if
Okay,
you want
that's
to do me
exactly
from
what
the
we do.
campaign headquarters, that'd be great.
Well, just before you get off, I'm going to roll a clip. I'd like to show, if we could, Tony McQuail of the NDP, so people can get a sense of Tony in an intro, and then while that's happening, you can gracefully exit, and
I
we'll
will.
tee up our next guest.
Thanks.
All right,
Ross.
say hi to your
Thanks,
campaign.
Paul.
Thanks, Alan, for
Thank you
dropping
very
by.
much.
Everyone.
See ya.
So Alan Thompson of the Liberal campaign running for Huron-Bruce. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks.
I
Good.
picked 3 words to sort of define why I got involved again, and that was representation, regeneration, and redistribution. And what I find really remarkable is almost anyone you talk to, they nod on at least two of those three and are going, yeah, right. And so often they're on all three of them. And so people are concerned, much more concerned about the environment than they were 40 years ago. We're kind of doing all right, but when they look to the future, they don't like what they see. They see really big problems, and they're also really disillusioned with the kind of bickering that they've seen and the kind of questionable ethics of people in high places, and not just south of the border. The failure to deliver on promises like electoral reform, the buying a pipeline instead of putting that money into things that would have benefited people across as opposed to a company trying to sell an oil pipeline. And the SNC scandal and the treatment of the Attorney General are all things that weigh on people that don't feel good.
We just saw Tony, and as we watch Tony, we're joined by a guest star. And Jim, I'm going to have you put that in your ear. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
we'll chat. We're going to introduce you in a second, Jim.
Oh, this is just...
It's so you can hear the clips we're going to show.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Good. So, Paul, you just saw a little bit about Tony. You've known Tony a long time. What's going through Tony's mind tonight? I mean, he's been around for 40 years, running in different provincial and federal.
I was going to recall in some of my history of how many times I ran against Tony, and I'm not sure. I think 3 times.
Really?
But I'm not quite certain. But it doesn't matter. They were all good encounters. We had good rapport with each other. Tony was an honorable man, still is, and his wife is an honorable person.
Yes, lovely.
They're a great family, and Tony is as honest as the day is long. He's sincere and well-meaning, and while he was never rewarded with being the MP, he left his mark in this riding of Huron-Bruce, and will continue to do so as long as he's with us. And I just wish Tony well, not too well, perhaps, but I wish Tony well, and I'm proud to call him my friend.
Oh, that's terrific. He is a gentleman, isn't he? He
Yes,
is
he is.
integrity. He actually lent me a book when he was here, The Donut Economics, and he actually I had to sign it out because I can't run away with it. So he actually made sure I return it. But he was wonderful because he uses props and things to help explain very complex ideas, and he's really keen on educating people. And I just really admire that about him. I think he's great. Now, Dr. Jim Hollingsworth, Dr. Jim, I'm just going to call you Dr. Jim because it's
Why
fun.
don't you call me Jim?
Can I call you Jim?
Absolutely.
Oh, we're going to do that then.
That's what my mama called me.
Did she, your mama?
73 years ago.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, Dr. Jim, and I'm going to say Jim now.
Yeah.
The reason we've asked you to join us is Dr. Jim is with Green Goderich.
Right.
And of course, the area in Huron-Bruce, as you know, Paul, we've got Blue Bayfield, we've got Eco Exeter, we've got Green Goderich. Huron-Bruce has really taken a leadership role nationally, if not even beyond nationally, in terms of environmental stewardship. And Jim, in a second, we're going to show a reel of environmental clips of each of the candidates talking.
Okay.
And then we just want you to reflect on how did we get from Paul's time when the environment was talked about passively to now it is the #1 issue on constituents' minds. The #1. Does that surprise you?
Yes, what surprises me is it's taken so long because we've known scientifically for 30 years or more that this was on the cards, and we haven't acted on it till, say, 2 minutes to midnight. So there's still hope if we can keep global warming preferably down to 1.5 degrees centigrade within the next 11 years. There's possibility that we'll avoid the tipping point, where it's a point of no return, of course. Currently, the world scientist tells us that looking at it globally, we're on a course for global warming to be between 2.4 and 3 point something in the next 11 years. So that's scary, but we mustn't give up hope. I think that's one of the reasons why all these environmental groups have popped up, because more and more people are getting the message. So the big question now, is it too little or too late? Or can we do something that's going to be really good for our grandchildren?
Right. And the youth have really taken a leadership role, haven't they?
Absolutely. I mean, the Greta Thunbergs of this world, and there are some of them of the same values here in Huron County, here in Goderich. And we had two of them speak. Well, you were there, you heard them, how passionately and how concerned they were about their future. Some of the millennials are talking about never having children because they don't want to bring children into a world of such uncertainty and such danger. And we only have to switch on the TV every night to see these rampant forest fires now in the Arctic. And my son lives in Vancouver, and he said, "Dad, you know, I think I might have to take my kids out of Vancouver next August." I said, "Why, David?" He said, "Because of the smoke."
Forest fires are imminent everywhere, everywhere. Places where we never heard of forest fires. And, you know, they go on forever. You have to wonder, how can we sustain fires of such magnitude where hundreds and thousands of acres, hectares, are burned away?
There's after tonight, a party is going to get in, and 4 of our 5 parties have a platform for the environment. And we're going to show you what they say, and a 5th that is kind of on the edges there, and we'll play that for you. But 4 of the 5 say they have a plan. How are we going to hold them accountable? I mean, how are we actually going to make sure something happens?
Well, we'd have a better chance if we had proportional representation.
Okay.
Because what will likely happen is that 33% of one party will get a minority. If they get to 35%, they will get a majority probably. So that means that 65% of Canadians do not have representation. So I think the healthiest thing for the planet is for us to have a minority government, because there will then be another party that can work with that minority to insist, as they have done in British Columbia, to make sure that this happens. If it's a majority government of either of the major parties, I have deeper concerns about the future.
Well, we have a country that's deeply polarized today.
Exactly.
And it has always shown those tendencies. The West, East, Quebec with its separate law and demands on culture and language. But it has really manifested itself in this election. It's always been there, but it really has manifested itself. Again, a party tonight that represents Quebec and Quebec only, while they would agree with us on the environment, they would not see us sharing equally among all the partners as a family shares among its children and family members. We have a party now in the West that occasionally brings forward the idea that maybe the West should separate from the West of Canada. That's not what a family does. You don't send children away because they don't happen to agree with you. You sit down at the table and you have dinner, and then you sit down and talk about it afterwards. And I think we've got to come together, and this applies on the polarization on environment, because we have a part of our country that doesn't look at environment the same, but they gave lip service to it, but there isn't the same kind of imagination about how and taking for real the realities that are there, because they are real. It's no longer just the David Suzukis that are talking about it. The David Suzukis are in my age and in the doctor's age group. But there's millennials and there's younger people now that are taken, and they've lit the mantle.
And
they're
they're
moving
worried.
with it.
They are
Oh,
worried.
desperately worried,
bet.
yes.
Yeah. The young lady that you spoke to at the climate strike, she said she was a little caught up in herself, and she said, "I'm sorry." She apologized. "I'm so nervous." And what we said back to her is, "I think everyone's nervous."
Yes, yes.
It was the most honest, vulnerable emotion. Now, sometimes our youth gets criticized that, oh, they're making too much of it, Jim. But
It's very appropriate. It's an appropriate reaction to be scared and to be frightened and to feel hopeless. But that doesn't bring us happiness. But if we invest in hope and action, we're energizing something that just might work. So more and more people are doing that, and we just hope it will bear fruit. But I think when the historians write this chapter in history, particularly this election, they'll say, what a terrible lost opportunity it was for politicians not to come together and work towards solving this climate issue. Instead, the climate issue has been turned into a political arena that's been divisive and that's been full of slander of the other, and it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. This situation, I think, that we're facing can be likened to something of the order, and I somewhat hesitate to say this because this is extreme thinking, a third world war. The issue here is that it's not so much creeping up on us now, it's more like galloping up on us, but it's still a war. And the interesting thing about this war that I imagine is that we human beings are the enemy and we're the defenders. We're the ones that have caused this. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. However, in the last 30 years, if you believe in scientific measures and knowledge, we've known about this. So why have we left it so late? Why have we left it so late?
would you like to hear some snippets of what our candidates said, and we
Sure.
can chat about it? I'll let you put in. You have your earplugs, your
I think
earbuds
so,
in.
yeah.
Paul, you want to put yours in? Let's roll, if we could. We have a reel of environmental comments from, I think, all or most of our candidates, and then we can respond to that. So that should come up here in a second, Jim. We talked, you just raised the environment. And it feels like today, and I know this has been something for you for 45 years at least. This is Tony.
Yep.
This is who you are. And it, arguably, people would say that the NDP has largely been a proponent for a long, long time. It feels like all the cool kids are doing this now. The environment's on everyone's platform. How is the NDP different, or how do you distinguish it?
Well, first I would say track record. Second, I would say it's great to talk about it. They talked about it in 2015, but what did they do about it? And you know, to me, the tragedy is if we'd been working on this really seriously in terms of thinking about renewable energy and efficiency in society, back starting in 1980, we'd be in a very different position than we are today. We're now in a position where we have to respond much more dramatically and urgently than we would have if we started to redirect the ship of state when I first ran.
I know everybody is bringing up climate change. We don't deny climate change like some people have confused. What we want is for provinces and local initiatives to be created to combat the changes and to adapt to the changes in climate.
That's a good clarification, because I think sometimes you could be branded as that. And so I'm really glad you clarified that for folks, because that is something you want people to really understand, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I put out is that I'm not a climate change denier, I'm a climate change realist.
Right.
I think in the approach to climate change is an enormous, there's a real gulf between really the progressive parties, the Liberals, the NDP and the Greens, and the Conservatives. And the fundamental difference is we believe very strongly that the time has come. We have to put a price on carbon. You know, there has to be a price to pay if you are going to pollute. And that's a fundamental aspect of our climate change policy. In addition to pouring billions of dollars into trying to develop alternative technologies and green technology, giving companies a break on their taxes if they will develop green technology. And the Conservatives say very clearly on their first day in office they will repeal what they call the carbon tax. And you're hard pressed to find an economist who thinks that's a good idea. There's almost unanimity that putting a price on carbon works.
Well, let me ask you it this way. If I'm here in Huron-Bruce, how do you tell someone why a carbon tax makes sense? How do you explain it in a way that makes sense to people?
I mean, I think it creates an incentive for good behavior.
Okay.
I make a parallel, it's not a precise one, but I tell people or ask them, when is the last time you threw a case of empty beer bottles in the garbage?
Right.
And they kind of shake their head like, well, no, we don't do that.
We don't do that in Canada.
We take them back to the beer store. So you've paid a price, you paid a deposit on those bottles, and you get it back.
Right.
And it rewards you for doing the right thing, and the bottles are reused and multiple times. And carbon tax is same concept. 9 out of 10 people, and the research on this is very, very clear. 9 out of 10 Canadians get more money back on their taxes than they paid at the gas pump. And I think it's a responsible, fair way to sort of create an incentive for people trying to use less fuel, use less fossil fuels, put less carbon into the atmosphere.
I do believe I brought that up at the environmental debate, that who would have thought 10 or 15 years ago that we would have an entire debate on the environment. And so times have changed, obviously, and people have a lot more focus on the environment than they did 15 or 20 years ago.
And if you have a family and young children, it's something you think about.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. So I think Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party recognize that if you're going to compete with the other political parties in 2019, you have to have an excellent environmental platform. And I think what we did is we went back to the drawing board to really present Canadians a great alternative to the environment, practical solutions. And I've mentioned at our debates, I think we have the best plan, and it's the plan that's easiest to understand, and it's the plan that doesn't penalize our citizens. And so that's why I disagree with the other candidates. I don't believe in a carbon tax because everybody up and down our streets are the ones that pay, right?
So how
And
would
they're
yours
doing-
work? How would yours work?
Right, so we have 3 guiding principles,
Okay.
and the one main guiding principle is green technology, but with our largest emitters, which with the other plans, they actually have exemptions. But with our largest emitters, we would set hard caps, and if they exceed those hard caps, they would contribute to a green technology fund to help clean up and fix their problems.
So there we had it. We had a reel of several of the candidates discussing. Were you involved, Jim, in the environmental debates, organizing that or attending those?
Well, Green Godrich
Yes,
was, but
yes.
Alex Robinson, she's one of our stars.
Oh.
She did it all. She put it all together, and I just showed up, as it were. But I think there were about 105 in the entire state country of Canada.
Right.
So for us to get one in Godrich was kind of pat on the shoulder,
for us.
because you had to apply, and they looked at whatever credentials they wanted to look at, and then they offered one, and then we had to play by their rules.
I don't think everyone knows that we kind of stand out nationally as one of the areas that hosted this.
One of 103 or 105.
That's
It got
pretty-
over the 100, but not
pretty
by much.
incredible.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there that
Yes,
night,
yeah.
and I had hoped to be there for that one. I
Yes.
was there for the first one, and the public debate.
I think
That's-
that again shows how important the health of the environment has become to people in this area. It was attended by about 100 people, and I think well, actually, one of the candidates counted the people as he was sitting there being somewhat bored, I guess, and he said there were 130. So I'm going to take his word rather than 100. It was very successful. All 8 or 9 questions were on the environment, and it was interesting to note that the candidate for the People's National Party did not show up. And he told us beforehand something along the lines that it wasn't worth his time. I'm paraphrasing what I heard via the grapevine, so don't quote me exactly. But that was a sad part of the evening.
Well, again, what you do and what you don't do sends a message, right?
Exactly.
You know, I think having one of these environmental debates is right up there on the Kraft Hockeyville winning that, right?
Yeah.
You know, like it feels that kind of par, right? It's good for us.
Yeah.
Good for us, yay us. And you heard Ben say, who would have thought? Who would have thought that it would be so high up on the priority list for all of us at this point? What did you think about the carbon tax, that conversation?
Well,
And beer bottles.
I guess when I look back, we had a lot of discussions. We had all kinds of discussions on the environment and which way to go. But the carbon tax seemed to always sort of come out as the way to go. And it was received favorably by a lot of people. And again, I have to draw back on 11 years of memory to recall some of these things. But I know that seemed to be the direction that our party felt that we needed to go. It wasn't a partisan thing. We didn't develop it because it was liberal policy from around the world, but it seemed to be the best from the professionals we had come in and talk to us. And we paid these people to come in and give us advice because basically we were starting from ground zero.
Right.
And so we did that. But I've always have believed that we have, and if humankind isn't responsible for it, who is and what is for the problems we have? 25 years ago, I planted 30,000 trees. And I've cultivated them, I've looked after them, I practiced good forestry husbandry in that forested area. And I have got to tell you stories, I could talk all evening on that. But that was my small contribution to this. And then governments want to come along and tell me how I should manage it and do all this, and then they can tell me how to harvest it. They don't need to tell me how to harvest it. I know how it can be done, and it'll be done better than what government, because some of the advice I took from them early on after planting has caused me a lot of grief. So I'm taking people's advice who have done this, and they've given me, so it's been elders' advice that I've been taking, not politicians or people in offices of education.
And it's great because we've seen so many environmental local efforts really rise up. So we're getting that at the ground, informed, passionate, knowledgeable response. That's where the grounding is really going to take, right, Jim?
Yes, and I think, I'm not sure, but I think you missed out one recent startup, and that's the Seaforth Group. Did you mention
no,
them?
I did not know
There's
about
a
that.
passionate group in
really?
Seaforth, yes.
We'll have to find
Yeah,
them.
and so Green Godrich got going about April of this year, and we didn't quite know where we were going and how it was going to be, but after the second month, we got an email from Echo Exeter, which is run by students. And their email said, how are you going to judge your success? You know, we were after plastic and addressing the climate change, but they had the smarts to say, yes, it all sounds good, but what are you going to do to assess your success? Well, fortunately, we have Alex on board, and she'd already said we're going to do a survey before we start, and then we're going to do a similar survey a year from then.
Measure.
So we got an answer for them, but that's the kind of passion and courage that they have. They reached out to us, a group of elders basically, and a couple of millennials, and said, how are you going to judge your success?
Isn't that terrific?
I thought that was great.
Isn't that terrific?
Yes.
We're, in a second, Jim, we're going to roll another kind of intro clip of another candidate who has really kind of warmed my heart, and that's Nicholas Wendler of the Green Party. Talk about, again, integrity and passion and belief. So why don't you stick around while we watch and roll Nicholas's intro clip. And then let's talk a little bit about Nicholas and what he's brought to Huron-Bruce in terms of a voice. Because I think that's a special
It is very special.
relationship. So let's take a look at Nicholas. What drew you into politics?
I feel like it sort of felt in the back of my mind like something that I could do to make changes. I'm not I think most people that really know me wouldn't think I would ever get into politics.
Yeah.
And I myself probably like 10 or 15 years ago wouldn't have really said I would. Because there's like, when you get really political, there's strong opinions, and I sort of like stay away from that a bit. That's naturally how I am. So yeah, but being involved in a lot of government services and stuff with having a disability and using the medical care system a fair amount, I figured I had some knowledge. So I figured, like, I've run 2 times federally, but I feel like provincially is kind of more where I have a better understanding of some of the issues.
So that was Nicholas Wendler of the Green Party. Really, really interesting man. I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with him here at the station and seeing him actually out at a lot of the debates. He attended practically every single debate. He was at the climate strikes. He really makes his way around and thoughtful, very considered. What do you think he's brought to Huron-Bruce?
I think he's brought, I was just thinking about that as I watched the clip, and what came up for me, I've never thought this before, he's the kind of the Terry Fox figure of politics. So despite his physical and speech difficulties and his mobility difficulties, he puts himself out there for a good cause. With all he's got. He was one of the first members of Green Godrich. He's been to every one of our meetings. And when we announced that we were going to be in the farmers market every Saturday for the entire summer, Nicholas was one of the first to put his name down. And then midway through the summer, we remembered that we were saying, whilst each member of what we call the core group of Green Godrich, they've got political views, we weren't going to share them because we wanted every political party to work for this cause. And lo and behold, when Nicholas had been to be 3 or 4 of the sessions, we discovered he was of the Green Party. So somebody took Nicholas aside and said, I think we've made a mistake, Nicholas. We really shouldn't have invited you because you're running. And I wasn't there, I wasn't privy to the conversation, but the gist of it was, that's okay. If I don't get elected, I want to join you in your efforts once the election's over.
He shared, Paul, with me, one of the things he shared, he's run provincially, and he really identifies with the provincial side of things because he's experienced so much of healthcare and really understands the challenges, which is, again, greater than the environment. But if you think about the greater environment in which we live and work and try to live our best life, he's very keenly aware. He said, I asked him what success would look like, and he emailed me later. And we've had this little email exchange going back and forth, which I look forward to getting him in my email. And he said, the highest I've ever received in votes was around 2,000. And tonight could be the night that he gets the most votes that he's ever gotten. So we're going to be watching for that, because if he exceeds 2,000, I think we got to really do a big shout out. And for everything that he's brought, and the visibility, and around accessibility too, is another big thing that he's really made people aware of throughout all this.
Well, I think when you look at people like him, who has given with such great effort to a great cause, what about those of us who have all the abilities and the faculties and the wherewithal to do all these things? He has to do everything through another level of effort that none of us can even imagine. And there's an empathy. This is a great community. Like Huron-Bruce has a lot of empathy. We sometimes think that people are hard and they don't have a heart. But there's a lot of people. This is a kind riding. And I hope the people are kind to him, because he is fighting a tough cause, which some people that are much more able than he physically have been unwilling to take the challenge and do it.
We talked before about legacy and when you've served and you're running now and talked about hard work. I think the legacy that he might leave is just that level of engagement and hard work. I think he'll be remembered, and we'll continue to see him on the stage, I think, in many ways, as just an inspirational leader. Inspirational leader.
And you'll certainly see him in the farmers market next year if he gets a lot more than those 2,000 votes. If he doesn't get a lot more than 2,000 votes, he'll definitely be there. But he'll be with us there in spirit.
Yeah, an incredible man, and just a real pleasure. One of the things we talked about with doing this program again, which hasn't really been done before, I keep saying that, but I'm kind of just, it hits me that we haven't shone a light on Ontario's West Coast by talking in depth about the issues with people who care about them, with our icons of leaders, and with all the issues. And he just really helps us appreciate Ontario's West Coast and everything it brings. So I think we're going to be seeing more of Nicholas.
I hope so.
Will you stick around for one more interview? We're going to see Kevin Clerks. Have we seen Kevin Clerks? I don't know that we have. I don't think we've run Kevin Clerks yet. We're going to run Kevin Clerks of the People's Party of Canada and get a bit of an intro of him. And that'll be our last intro of all the candidates. So we'll have seen them, and you'll hear a little bit about him.
Great.
So Kevin Clerks. So big change in the sense that we've birthed a new party, a new federal party. There's already been a couple by-elections. This is the first federal election nationally.
Yeah.
What's it like to stand up a brand new party?
Daunting.
Yeah.
It's been an amazing experience. I mean, we've got over 35,000 members now. We're the fastest growing party in Canadian history that we're aware of. And yeah, it's just been like we've got over, I think it's 320 or 310 candidates in this election.
So you're running quite a bit across the
Oh, yeah.
country. Yeah. And in Ontario as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, and it was doing well with candidates.
Do you keep in touch with other candidates in the area?
Yeah,
that you're running with?
mostly email and that. but,
Right, you help each other out.
Yeah,
Yep.
Bria Adkins, I think, is the south, and then Bill Townsend up in Owen Sound.
Good. So as you're out and around, you're knocking on doors, you're having gatherings, meetings with people, what are they telling you?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Back in June, when we first started doing it, nobody was interested. And I was really afraid that people were so apathetic with the situation that they weren't going to vote. But now people have become so actively involved. Like I said in a McDonald's, and 8 people are there, and they're all talking politics. So there is a lot of concern with what's happening in the future, and interest in what's going on.
So that was Kevin Clerks, and it's the inaugural run of that national party, the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier, right?
Yes, Maxime Bernier.
And that's kind of a splinter off of the Conservative Party, Paul.
Conservative Party, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, there was only half a dozen votes or so different between Scheer and Bernier. Bernier led up until that last vote, that last ballot.
And so, Jim, Kevin described himself earlier as more of a climate realist, not a climate denier. I'm not sure what to take with that, but it's probably the one party that doesn't have a platform per se.
Exactly. I'm not sure what to take of it either, except that we know that they don't have a platform and don't have any intention of having one. So he was probably right in making the decision not to come to that meeting, because his contribution would have been a negative one. So I saw him on that first all candidates meeting, and I liked him as a human being. He had what I would call some high degree of good common rural Ontario sense, but I'm far, far removed from his political beliefs. But the thing is, we all have to get together and sit in a circle and make these decisions. And that's why I go back to it again. It's been so abhorrent for me to see this character assassination and polarization and divisiveness go on in this election. As a result of that, whichever party we belong to, we're all, at the bottom line, losers. Because if we're going to win this climate debate, we have to pull together. We can't do it from one corner.
Oh, absolutely.
And so there's chagrin there on my behalf, because I think we've missed the opportunity of a lifetime for our children, for millennials, and for other species.
In a little bit, I'm going to show you, Paul, and I hope you're still watching, a little bit about the conversation we had on sort of opinions on the political tone here in Huron-Bruce. And Nicholas actually comments on that, and it's really quite, he has a great comment on that. And also we're going to talk a little bit about one of the topics you brought up, which, so I hope you're watching, is the proportional representation and just what that would mean. So we have some great topics coming up. Jim?
Yes?
Couldn't be more thrilled that you dropped in and spent time with us.
A pleasure.
And on the most important issue that really registered high on people's issues list.
Yes, and thank you for inviting me. And I speak on behalf of an organization, so I speak with many voices coming through the same vocal cords. And I want to congratulate you and your staff for doing this, because I hear it's the first time. And I hope you do it for the next provincial and federal election, and I hope I'm lucky enough to get invited again.
I think you have some special things that you can bring to the table. I think we want you around.
Good, thank you.
Good. So what we're going to do, Jim, is I'm going to roll some clips while you gracefully exit.
Yes.
So no one sees you just sort of whisk away and with a little carbon footprint of minuscule. We're going to roll some clips, actually, of street interviews that we did at the farmers market a week before the today, and we talked to a lot of people who were undecided. And so we're going to hear the first of three, and it was just interesting. We got a wide array of commentary, and people genuinely were undecided a week out, and they still were, I think, yesterday.
I really find that hard to believe. But I'm a different personality than a lot of those people, I guess, have ability and patience to wait it out. But I draw my conclusions early.
You did, you did. Well, we're going to zero in, and we're going to roll this clip of our first street interviews at the farmers market. Dr. Jim, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
We're up at the Goderich Farmers Market at the last weekend here in the fall, and we're talking to people about if they're decided, if they've already voted, and maybe what's influenced them. So have you decided yet who you might vote for in Huron-Bruce?
Yeah, I've been decided since before it even started.
So you had a good sense. Was there anything that stood out to you that was important?
I have 3 young kids, so I'm all about money and cuts and whatnot. And honestly, I don't agree with the way the country's going right now, so it's time for change.
Good. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I'm with Dawn up at the farmers market. I see you got some wonderful pears and apple cider for the last fall weekend up here.
Looking forward to Thanksgiving, yes.
I bet. Well, a lot of people, I don't know if they're looking forward to it or not, are getting ready for the election on the 21st. Are you someone who would say that you formed your opinion, or you're still thinking about it?
Probably still thinking about it, honestly. It's a difficult decision this time. It's hard to know who to go with.
Do you have any issues or topics that are really influencing you?
I'm moved by the environmental concerns. I am concerned about the policies that are being presented and what the best direction to take is. I think the climate change problem is compelling.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I'm interested in in healthcare with respect to a universal access to medications. I think that's really important, and how we bring that about and whether we bring it about distinguishes some of the parties, and I feel strongly about getting that program going.
Good. Well, happy Thanksgiving to you, and enjoy this beautiful fall weather.
Thank you very much. It's a little chilly, but
we'll make out. We'll do all right. Thank you, Dodd.
Okay.
So we're about a week out from the election. Are you yet decided on who you might vote for?
I'm thinking about voting for Ben Lobb, So I had a friend of mine his name was Paul Steckley. He used to run for Conservative years ago. So I've been doing Conservative ever since.
Okay, so you've Ben's been our representative for a while now. Do you think he's been doing a great job?
Oh yes, he has.
What's been one of the most important issues for you this year?
I haven't had any. There was just different things, like I've seen different names to vote for, but then I'm thinking, no, I'd rather just stick with Ben because he's a great guy.
Good. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Have a happy Thanksgiving. So there you have it, Paul, some honesty. And I didn't know that you were conservative.
No, I didn't either.
You didn't know that.
No,
First
didn't
you
know
hear
that.
about it. Well, see, we're always unveiling trade secrets right here on this show.
I find even at this late hour, I find surprises of people, even though they did try to court my entry into the Conservative Party. Well, first of all, the Alliance Party, the Reform Party,
Wow.
wanted me.
Maybe that's what she's referencing. Maybe she had an
I don't
inside
know.
track.
I don't know. They
Inside
thought-
track. That's funny though, eh?
I had one fellow tell me that I was a conservative. I said, yes, fiscally I have some conservative
Yeah.
tendencies.
Yeah, we
But,
can't be easily defined,
No,
can
but
we?
I said there's something that defines me as a liberal. I have a real heart in
Real
here.
hurt for it. You know, as we talk to people on the street, we talk with Dr. Jim about some of the big issues that people are grappling with, and certainly the environment was big. Some of the other big ones were housing,
Oh, yes.
affordability,
Affordability.
also representation, we talked about that, and sort of the rural identity, that rural kind of, you know, do we get the same fair shake? So those are some of the things that really popped up for a lot of different people. What would you say would be some of the ones that might turn people one way or the other?
Well, the People's Party, of course, this being a rural riding, supply management is
Yes.
one of the issues that stands probably first and foremost sort of out in the People's Party platform. They don't have a platform, but in their statement of things that the policies they want to put forward, and that they don't want any part of supply management. Well, that doesn't resonate in Huron-Bruce because even those commodity groups, the seeds and oils and grain and oil seeds, and hogs, for instance, these are not commodities that are under supply management. But these groups, for the most part, support our fellow industries in the poultry and in the dairy industry. So that wouldn't, of course, be one. Of course, environment is one thing that they don't stand with, and we have a strong environmental policy here. We have with the Bruce Nuclear, and we have this riding is, because it's rural, you would think we don't have much of a union presence in this riding, but we have a union presence in this riding, a huge union presence in the riding, not only in the Bruce, but we have it right here in Goderich. We have two industries, or maybe three, that have unions. And so we have to take and make accommodation for those people who represent themselves in the workforce differently than what farmers do. So, and then of course there's the urban, but Goderich, even though it's a population of 7,000 or 8,000 people, we don't have an urban area really in this riding. We don't have a city.
No.
We have municipalities, and they vary in size from 5,000 or 6,000 to upwards of maybe 10 at the most. And so we just have a different riding, but we've come to identify, because we have the farmers markets and a lot of these small places, people bring their goods and their produce and they sell, and there's urban people that look forward to Saturdays or whenever day they have this Exeter, it's Thursdays, I believe, coming and getting the supply for the next week, fresh.
Yeah.
And they like to buy locally. One of the slogans that has sort of been carried out, and people have come to accept that. They want that.
Yeah, that idyllic kind
yeah,
of world. And Ben
yeah.
spoke to that. He says it's an idyllic. People think that way,
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Right. Paul, I'm going to put up a slide here, and it's a slide kind of profiling the riding. And I just want to kind of talk through a little bit more of the personality of the riding. It's got a map on it, and it has municipalities, etc. And I just want to talk through for our viewers the personality of Huron-Bruce. You said, again, we have 14 municipalities. 14. That's quite a bit, right? Like, that's a lot of different personality at play, right?
Well, and when you have 14 municipalities, when we have Remembrance Day,
Yeah.
we have 14 legions.
Oh,
Or similarly,
Right,
that number. I'm
right.
not sure just where it's at
Yeah.
now because a few legions have closed.
Yeah.
But my choices were always, do I go north or south? Where was I last year? And how many accommodations can I make for that service?
Yeah.
Because there's only one 11th on the 11th day.
Right.
So if it was on a Monday Remembrance Day, then they usually started on a Friday night. So I did a Friday night, a Saturday night, and maybe a Saturday at 11 because some of them did change the hour to accommodate
Right.
politicians and others. And so those are the kind of things that stood out for me as making accommodation for the kind of demographics that
Right.
manifest themselves in this riding.
it was, it's interesting. I think which is fine actually, 9:28 is the time. We are 2 minutes out from the polls closing, and we have, I think it's 246 polls in Huron-Bruce. So we're going to start hearing those come in. And I'm not sure we'll be able to identify the poll numbers and be able to say, oh,
No,
that's Walkerton.
sure,
I don't know
sure.
how they'll broadcast that.
I don't know.
But if they do, we'll look them up because I have a listing of all the polls. But it would be interesting to see, how did Goderich go? How did they come in? Because Goderich, if we look out, Paul, should be a little bit of a mix, right? Because like you said, there's a strong union profile. We would expect to see a fair, we'd have to expect to see a nice array in Goderich, right? But if we look up north, we'd expect to see a little bit more maybe liberal, and an inland a little bit more conservative, and some spots for
the rural
Tony.
parts,
Yeah.
I mean, I come from a rural
You are.
rural township.
Good old Brunson line, yeah.
And Blue Water. And in my many years of politics, other than in municipal, I never once won Stanley Township.
Isn't that interesting?
Never once won it.
How does that feel?
Well, I guess in the business of politics, you learn rejection early or you're out early.
So you just take that in stride.
You take it in
You take
stride
that
and
in
you say,
stride.
well, forgive
That's
them, for they know not what
funny.
they do.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Wow. And Paul, as you traveled around the riding then and now, in terms of, I looked this up, in terms of the national average and the Ontario average, Huron-Bruce seems to fall kind of in line with the median income, etc. Although we do have maybe half the population kind of falls at a living wage or below.
Yeah, there's a fairly high percentage of people that do, but not relative in numbers to
Okay.
some of the other ridings.
Okay.
We have, because of Bruce, the averages changed significantly.
Okay.
And so that our average wages in Huron-Bruce living income is much higher
Okay.
than what, if you were asking that of a farmer, he would tell you one thing. But when you put the averages down on a spreadsheet, you would find that Huron-Bruce does quite well.
Well, I'm just told that the polls have closed. So very shortly, we should start to see, and we have our laptop up here, we might see some of the advanced polls come in. Are you okay staying for a little
yes,
while?
I'm gonna stay
I know,
for-
is Kathy okay if you stay for a little while? We got to get the boss to speak in here.
Yeah.
We got to make sure she's okay with
Yeah.
it too.
Oh, yes.
Okay, good.
Well,
we
we're
got.
going to go here, or we're going to go over there where it's where it's noisy, and
Well, it's going to be interesting because now we're going to see, and we're looking online here, and we see that the Liberals currently hold 24 seats, the Conservatives 6, the NDP 1, the
Six,
Bloc
you
1,
say?
26 for the Conservatives,
yeah.
NDP 1, Bloc 1, Green 1. So obviously these are the very early ones,
Yeah.
probably mostly from the Atlantic, right?
Yeah,
Et
those
cetera?
would be Atlantic.
Atlantic. So soon we should be getting ours in, and those advanced polls, Paul, they could be very interesting.
Oh, they could be very much telling what's in store tonight.
Yeah, we heard, we reached out to some of the youth, the college
Yeah.
and university students, and many of them said, one, they came out, they voted, but they actually returned to Huron-Bruce to vote because they thought their vote mattered more here than in the city.
Is that right?
So Where will those votes go? Won't that be interesting?
My niece, who is, no, not my niece, my granddaughter, she's at McMaster.
Okay.
And she came home to vote.
So she got in there too. I think it's going to be fun when we see the numbers start popping up here, and we might reach out for comment as well to folks. One of the topics again we talked about was that was on people's minds was affordability, and we have some clips that we can show. I'd love you to watch those with me. Some affordability clips that we heard from various folks, and just again to talk about that was one of the big issues on people's minds is just getting by. So maybe we can roll the first of those and then chat about that. So is this what you mean by redistribution then? Is this that 1R we're talking about right now?
That's my third R is redistribution, and that's the need to say, okay, we're going to build a fairer economy, and we're going to ensure that we have a redistributive economy so that the wealth that we create get spread out amongst us. And things like our pharmacare program, the dental care program, child care, post-secondary education are all ways that then you take that money and you make it so that it helps virtually everybody across the economy and community. And so that I think is a significant difference. And it also means, because we're talking about stopping the subsidies that the oil companies are getting, going after the folks who are taking money off to tax havens, and dealing with speculation in the real estate market, and particularly money laundering in the real estate market. Those are all places that you also then get more money to put into the collective needs of the society. But then regeneration at the social level and the sort of community level is rebuilding the housing stock. So we're talking about building 500,000 new housing units over 10 years, but also retrofitting and fixing things so that they aren't as costly to heat, and so that the cost savings can be used to pay for the cost of renovating. And there are also certainly things that you can do in terms of the sort of social dynamic and social structure to regenerate your society.
So, of course, Tony, he's his 3 R's, right? He has redistribution being one of the big ones. So, of course, that's an NDP platform. But no one tells it better than Tony, does he?
Yes. Well, Tony has, he's taken that issue very seriously for a long time. I mean, this is not the first election. He's done this before. And we had a promise made in the last, going into the last election in 2015, that this would be the last election, first past the post.
Right.
And I was part of quite a number of meetings where we met, including some here in Goderich, well attended, where people brought their different ideas. And at the end of the day, I mean, we could see sort of a pattern developing, but it became clear right from the outset there were 3 different directions that we were going. And there was just absolutely, and we could see this, I mean, whether we favored one or the other, and I was, supportive of this idea. And it just went nowhere. And for the Prime Minister to flog that horse, that was flogging a dead horse at this time. That doesn't mean you give up. I mean, if you believe in something, did I do this many times because I believed, firmly in certain things, and I didn't give up the first time I was beat down.
Right.
I did like Diefenbaker. I got up again. Diefenbaker lost 5 times before he won.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I have some clips, and we'll pull one up here in a second. We'll get our fine friends to pull up one of the electoral reform clips from Ben, because Ben talks on this, and it's interesting what he has to say on this topic as well, because he kind of shares that same idea that we got to be thinking about this, and this could be the environmental issue next time around. Like, this could be the number one issue.
It could be. Yeah, I don't know where this is going to go. It all depends what kind of, if we have, for instance, a minority Liberal government tonight, and the NDP are called upon to support, that'll be an issue they put forward.
That's right.
And in order to gain support and maintain governance, sometimes you have to put a little water in your wine.
Yep, I think we could see some water in the wine.
Yeah.
Well, let's roll, if we can, Ben's comments on electoral reform representation. not that one. How about, do we have a clip on Nick on that? Tony. Okay, we have Tony again. Well, let's hear Tony. Let's hear Tony
Actually,
talk
one of
about
the things
electoral reform. No, we
I
have
really
Nick.
like about our platform, in particular this election, is that in our climate plan with Mission Possible, I don't know why I keep saying Mission Impossible, but I've made that mistake a couple times, is that like a component of that plan is to have an inner cabinet. I believe it's sort of like Winston Churchill's war cabinets and stuff that's cross party lines, like it includes all party members, like all members of each party, and just working together to tackle an issue rather than because we only have one planet, so.
Yeah. Nick, we only have one planet. Isn't that great as he talks about electoral reform? He's pushing on that, right? Yeah.
I sometimes, on that point of one planet, I sometimes really wonder the merit in spending the money we spend in doing outer space. We want to go and we want to take people to other planets, and let's first of all get this one right.
So you're not a fan maybe of the Space Force that our friend down south has?
I shouldn't say I'm not supportive of the space program. I think it's been good for us.
Or the Space Force,
Yeah,
the new Space Force.
Yeah. But I think we've taken it to the point where I think if we took all that effort that we've put into seeing other planets and maybe putting life onto those planets where perhaps there's never been life before, and even the amount of, I have another pet peeve that bothers me sometimes, and that is the issue of the money we spend in war. When basically a lot of that could be mitigated if we could find ways to feed these people. Get rid of the anger, get rid of the hostilities.
Yeah.
We could feed a lot of people with what we spend in war. And there's just so many things in this world that politicians just can't fix. Like we can have a policy for it, but we don't have a fixed program for it.
It's interesting you say that, Paul. Today I was getting some gas before I returned here to Goderich, and I asked the young man at my car if he had voted yet, and he said no. And I said, so after this? And he said, no, I'm not voting. There's really no one who appeals to me. He didn't use quite those words that nicely.
Yes.
And just the fact that, whether you didn't vote, which we hope people do, but the fact that we're not going to solve all the ills with who we put in power. It does take all of us, right?
That's right.
That's what you're trying to get across tonight.
We won't solve policy. We won't solve some of the world's greatest problems, which basically are human problems, interactionary problems between peoples who choose not to agree with each other, and because of greed, and how that President Trump is sending the people who are leaving Syria, now he's sending them to Iraq to do what? Not peacekeep, look after the oil fields.
Right.
In most cases, if there wasn't oil there, we didn't fight. We didn't fight. We don't fight unless there's something to fight for, and it's not usually people.
It's interesting because we come back to Huron-Bruce, and what do people want to fight for? They want to fight for the environment, they want to fight for affordability, they want to fight for housing. We heard, let's show another clip, Paul, of what people are fighting for around affordability. I think we have a great one. I'm willing to be surprised on which one, but I think surprise me on an affordability clip, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So is this what you mean by redistribution then? Is this that one R we're talking about right now?
That's my third R is redistribution, and that's the need to say, okay, we're going to build a fairer economy, and we're going to ensure that we have a redistributive economy so that the wealth that we create gets spread out amongst us. And things like our pharmacare program, the dental care program, child care, post-secondary education are all ways that then you take that money and you make it so that it helps virtually everybody across the economy and community. And so that I think is a significant difference, and it also means, because we're talking about stopping the subsidies that the oil companies are getting, going after the folks who are taking money off to tax havens, and dealing with speculation in the real estate market, and particularly money laundering in the real estate market. Those are all places that you also then get more money to put into the collective needs of the society. But then regeneration at the social level and the sort of community level is rebuilding the housing stock. So we're talking about building 500,000 new housing units over 10 years, but also retrofitting and fixing things so that they aren't as costly to heat, and so that the cost savings can be used to pay for the cost of renovating. And there are also certainly things that you can do in terms of the sort of social dynamic and social structure to regenerate your society.
So, Paul, that was, of course, Tony talking about the challenges. You know, your family, your sons are in the landscaping business. I often drive by them up and down the road. And I was talking with another kind of Good Stanley Township company, and some of the things they're concerned about, again, is getting qualified labor, and they can't get qualified labor because they can't get houses. So housing and affordability really has become an issue here.
It's a big issue. It's a big issue in Huron-Bruce, and I think it's a big issue in not only our area, but in most rural areas. The other part of it, of course, is getting, first of all, the bodies that need houses. And it's a desperate situation. I mean, I know of very few businesses that aren't looking for help. Restaurants that can't open because they haven't got the help to do it.
That's right.
And restaurants that are working a couple of days short of a week because they can't find enough help to stay open all those days. And it isn't as though they're not getting, like the minimum wage is now almost $15.
Right.
Almost $15. And that won't carry a family, but it goes a lot further than what we used to pay them.
Yeah.
And but we need, first of all, the people. I mean, my sons tell me that they've had people come, want a job, and don't even show up for the first day of work.
Oh, really?
Oh, many times, many times. In fact, in the last couple of years, I think they've had at most 2 men come that stayed, that came and wanted to work. The rest never even showed, or showed for a day and never showed again.
Yeah, and we want a vibrant economy, but again, it's all got to work together. It's a very, it's a fabric, right, of all these things that have to work together.
And so now we have our seasonal workers program, which works well for those people who are in the fresh fruits and vegetables business. And the program is an excellent program. Mexicans and Jamaicans and these people. And they come season after season. They come year after year. They've developed a friendship. It's their family for these people. And my sons are in the position where they almost are ready to turn that way. But the problem is the laws on migrant workers is such that they don't apply. They don't qualify for the same kind of help. So they have to go first, exhaust all avenues before you can even make a request. And by the time you're done exhausting all the avenues and finding out there's no one, your season's over.
Right, and those are the unique rural issues that we deal with that maybe aren't always heard in Ottawa. And like you said, you had to be strong.
Yeah,
You had to be strong.
and those issues are the kinds of issues that that come forward at those meetings that the commodity groups put forward to their members of parliament every March or April, whenever they choose to do it. And I attended those for 15 years, where we would sit down and our executive assistant or whoever we chose would come and take notes, and we would write, and we would take briefs, petitions, and we would take them, and we would go to Ottawa to meet the minister responsible for that area. And that's what a member of parliament has to do.
Right.
And that's what we expect of our member of parliament.
And Huron-Bruce deserves a light shone on it, right?
We need someone who is really going to do that. And I mean, I did that for 15 years, and I know how much work it was.
It's work, isn't it?
It's because if you make a promise, well, I'll deal with it, I'll see this person, and I'll get back to you. But if you never get back to them, there isn't a lot of confidence in that person's belief that you're doing the job for them.
And we, you know, it was interesting, Ben, in one of the chats we had, he really talked about how much we have to be proud of here. And you know, I asked him about, you know, looking back, what does he most value? And it's the service. It's being there for people in need. He really mentioned how much he's really kind of taken a care around health care, and those are things that really strike us at our heart, right? And people with rare diseases. So he has found some things he shared that really resonate, where he's met people at their most vulnerable. And I just imagine you're on 24/7 as an MP. I imagine you're always on.
And I mean, there's no issue that sometime or another in your many years in the office you don't meet up with.
Yeah.
People in hospices that we're attending a funeral tomorrow. Good friend of ours who died at the hospice in Clinton. And we have all these services, wonderful services. Like we have a lot of things here that we don't have to take a second position to anyone in terms of our culture. We have 3 theaters in this riding, good theaters, good theaters. We don't have to drive to Sarnia or to drive to Stratford, I guess we could, but Waterloo or Toronto, we don't have to do that. We can go to Blythe, Grand Bend, we can go right here to Goderich.
That's right.
And so we have culture here. We have wineries that are starting up.
The craft businesses.
The craft business is doing gangbusters.
Yeah, we are the new Niagara region, aren't we?
That's right.
Yeah.
Every time you go down the road, there seems to be one popping up.
Cider,
somewhere. Cider.
everything. Yeah, that's right. Let's turn and watch a clip of Ben talking a little bit about affordability, because he hits on some of these topics too. If we can roll the Ben clip.
Our platform is really about affordability.
Okay.
And so on the affordability side, what we're proposing, obviously, we're taking the GST off home heating and energy bills, which will help people, there's no doubt about that. We have a tax cut for the lowest federal tax bracket, which is approximately $12,000 to $47,000 a year. That bracket, we're taking it from 15% down to 13.5%. That'll provide some relief. We're also we're going to scrap the carbon tax, so that should make it more, should make fuel more affordable, and it should also take a little bit off the price of your home oil and your natural gas. So there's those components. That's in your back pocket.
Right.
But in regards to housing affordability, that's a whole other discussion. And so there's buying your first home affordability,
Exactly.
right, which we have a plan for that. But when we're talking about affordable housing, a lot of that comes through transfers with provinces. So I mentioned the social program, so we transfer money that way. We can also look at different ways of doing that. The money goes to cities, or in our case, it goes to the county, and then work with the municipalities on it. But as you travel through the riding, there are a lot of homes, believe it or not, that are not lived in.
You said that at one of the debates.
I know. And I'm not saying
I was shocked by that.
80% of the homes or anything like that, but there are homes.
That was an eye-opener.
There are homes that are sitting vacant that could have people living in them.
Right.
So that is one thing that we need to look at. Now, it's the municipalities and the county that would really, and I'm not blaming them, I'm just saying these are opportunities.
But how can you support is the idea.
Exactly.
Okay.
In addition to that, we have lands in usually every town that is underutilized. It may or may not be owned by the county, it may or may not be owned by the municipality. But we're in Goderich here today, and I was at a debate, and I mentioned a few properties in town that are in our downtown core in Goderich that have sat vacant for way over a decade, that could be utilized for seniors housing, housing in general, affordable housing, to allow people the opportunity to live in Goderich, to be able to afford to live in Goderich, and work in our service sector, our seasonal sector, and do the jobs that we need filled here in town, for example. That translates motivates from one end of the riding to the other, but it's a great case study here in town. So what can the county do? What can the municipality do? We can see, but certainly motivating the person that owns that land to actually do
Right.
something with it would be a great first step.
That's
Would
great.
be a great first step. And as well, in our towns, you know, we're not going to build a 30-story condominium or
Right.
whatever, but do we have to limit it to 3 stories?
Right.
I don't know, but I think that's pretty well the practice in all our communities. Maybe there's an opportunity to revisit that, but there's a huge opportunity. And of course, if people are coming in from outside of Huron-Bruce and they're looking to move here and rent a place to see how they like it, to do their job, we have to have places for them to stay.
And that's challenging.
Yes, it is.
Very challenging. Having
And-
returned here from, we had to rent, and it was very difficult.
And it's high rent.
Yeah,
It's
yes.
high rent. So
Yeah, tough for
this-
families.
Yep, these are the things that we need to do. We can do it. We just have to all pull together and make sure it happens. And there's a couple of great examples in Huron-Bruce that we've done when we were in government. There's a beautiful apartment in Clinton beside Huronview that is for seniors' homes, and it's affordable to live there, and it's beautiful. It's brand new. It's well maintained. We did another project in Port Elgin. It was a brownfield site, and between the municipality and the county and the federal and provincial government, we were all able to work together, redevelop a brownfield site, put in a nice 3 or 4 story apartment building and some other townhouses.
Yeah.
Fantastic solution. Yep.
So that's interesting, Paul. Ben had a lot to say
Yeah.
on that.
Well, I know that those kind of things are things that you have to sit down with your mayors.
Yes.
As an example, we had, I think the time that I was there, we had 11 or 12 forums, round tables, where we brought in the Minister of Health, or we brought in the GST, for instance, we brought the Minister of Finance in, and we have reports that we created. Greg wrote reports
Yeah,
after
yeah.
these, like they're fairly, and you'll find from those forums or those round tables, you'll have ideas that come to the table. There may even be somebody that has brought a petition in or has brought a submission in that they want you to take. So that's where a member of parliament becomes effective at the local level.
Okay.
To take what you've learned there and go to the federal minister, and lay it down and say, listen, there's money, we have this portfolio of money, and we'd like to be included in that. So you have to have your municipalities back home ready to accept that, to receive that money, because you have to have it shovel ready before the money is approved. And
Yeah.
so there's just a lot of spade work and a lot of hard work that has to be done.
That's a great way to say it, spade work. I love that way to think about it.
You have to be prepared to do that. And if you're not prepared to do it, these things don't happen. And municipalities, after a while, when nothing, even the local politicians, I think, have it in their craw that government just decides, well, Goderich municipality should have this chunk of money.
Right.
And I think it should apply to seniors housing, or should apply to those people who need are on fixed incomes and need geared income housing. It doesn't work that way.
You need the municipalities, and that's where you kept coming back to, Tony. You keep coming back to
Like we had
local
a
solutions,
A
right?
case in point with the Goderich port. The ministry of the government determined that it was time to get rid of ports and harbors in Canada. We owned hundreds of them across the country. And Goderich was a port. It wasn't a harbor, it was a port.
Right.
And Goderich was one of the few ports in Canada that made a lot of money. And anyhow, they only spent a portion of the money in repairing things at the harbor. The rest of it went to Ottawa, subsidized other harbors. Well, when it came for sale, and I immediately went back to Goderich and said, listen, here's an opportunity. Guys, prepare yourself for this. So we had meetings back and forth, and yeah, it was for sale, and the prices weren't established, but first of all, we had to find an interest. Well, there was lots of interest. The port, the town, of course, and the elevators, and the salt mine were all keenly interested in becoming owners or part owners of this. And it boiled down to the point where I could see a fight developing here. And I had, in my mind, established what I wanted for Goderich.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that one of those entities should own it by themselves, but rather there be corporate ownership. And so when Goderich said to me, they're going to buy it, and we don't want these others, we'll work with them. I said, no, Goderich will never own it. Goderich will never own it. And of course, salt mine is American owned. And I said, there'll never be an American company ever own this port either. It'll remain Canadian, and it'll remain local. And so they finally realized that I wasn't going to bend or bow to them and on that issue, and we finally agreed that they would. And so finally, Goderich were told that they had to come up with a price. They came up with a price, called me one Friday or Thursday afternoon, and David Collinet wasn't very far away, and I just went to David, I said, come with me, and we sat down. I said, Goderich has made us an offer, and we'd better be taking it. Goderich has subsidized the federal government for years and years. It's time that we do something for Goderich. And this is a good deal for us. It's a good deal for Goderich.
Wow.
And I said, okay, he said, give me a few hours.
Yeah.
I'll tell you in the morning. In the morning, he said it's sold.
It's sold.
And today we have a port authority, I'll call it that for lack of the term that they have. And that's the way the Goderich port is being run. And everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. That's what it takes to get the job done.
Well, you know what's kind of cool? This is a great segue. In a second, we're going to have Tony sitting with us to talk about what it takes to get the job done. And another thing, results are starting to come in. So I don't think they're coming in at the riding level, and I'll listen to my ear for that, but across the nation, let me share this with you, Liberal 94, Conservative 66, Bloc Québécois 17, NDP 10, Tony's listening, Green 1. So those are where we stand nationally at this point. I don't yet see, and someone can whisper in my ear and correct me, I don't yet see anything locally yet.
Yeah.
It'll take a little bit, won't it, Paul?
Oh, yeah.
So what I think we'll do.
Yeah, half an hour. That's just barely enough time.
So and those advance polls again should be coming in pretty quick.
Oh, yes, that could.
Yeah. We'll, let's show some more streeters, and that'll allow Tony to come and sit down with us. So we're going to roll some more streeters of those undecided people that kept me entertained.
Yeah.
And see where that takes us, and then we'll get Tony sitting down next to us, and you can grill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he deserves that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we're up at the farmers market, and you're getting in your last farmers market of the weekend.
Yes.
And of the season.
I know, it's wonderful.
You got your coffee.
Absolutely.
You're decided on your coffee. You decided on pears. Let me ask you this question. Are you decided yet on October 21 who you might vote for in Huron-Bruce?
Yes, I have.
Okay, what's influenced you?
I think really what's influenced me specifically for the Goderich and Huron County and Bruce County area is good representation in Ottawa. I think that we're lacking that at the moment, and there are some really, really important issues that need to be addressed.
Are there any specific issues that stand out to you?
I think locally the homeless problem. I think that we need a little bit of attention, a light shone on that, and I'm hoping that the person that I vote for is going to do that.
That's terrific. Well, have a happy Thanksgiving with you and your family.
You too, Roz. Thank you.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. So we're about a week out from the federal election. Are you someone who's decided already on who you're going to vote for?
Honestly, right now at this point, I'm not 100% sure. But to me, like, what's the most important thing for me is healthcare. I'm a PSW. We're super short-staffed everywhere. We need the help, and I'm currently going back to school to be a practical nurse, which we also need help with that as well.
So you'll be thinking a little bit in these next 5 to 7 days about who best could represent you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Not only is it the last week in the farmers market, we're creeping up on the federal election.
It's coming quick, yeah.
Yeah. So how important is that to you this time around?
It's important. It matters. I guess it's funny. I never thought the federal election would influence the provincial politics as much as it has. That seems to be a lot in the news right now. So it's interesting for sure.
Yeah. Do you have you already decided, or are you still thinking about it?
I think I'm still thinking about it.
Yeah,
There's some things to weigh up. Yeah.
What are some of the things on your mind?
Well, I'm a school teacher, and so it does seem like the provincial activities and all the union stuff tends to weigh a bit more heavily. But it is interesting, like I was saying before, how the federal politics does trickle down to the provincial level for sure.
Good. So you got a week of thinking and reckoning, and then we'll know what happens on the 21st.
We'll look forward to it.
Good. Well, enjoy this Thanksgiving weekend.
Thanks. You too as well.
Okay. Take care. So you can see again some of the streeters we have. It's really interesting that people are still making up their minds. That was a week ago, and we know people a day ago were still making up their minds. I think I know someone who's made up his mind. I think you probably voted today, Tony.
No, I voted in the advance polls.
Oh, good for you, leaving nothing to chance.
That's right.
Nothing
But
to chance.
my wife voted today.
Of course she did.
And we almost missed the poll on our way into Godrich from Lucknow because you get on autopilot. We went past the polling station, pulled a quick Huey, and got back in to vote.
Wow, does she ever know to bring a little thrill to your ride, eh?
Yeah.
That's great. So we have some local results that have popped up on the screen. So we have some initial polls. Shall we share them? We have only one poll in so far of the 259. Ben with 147, Alan with 88, Tony with 28, Nicholas 7, and Kevin Clerk's 5. So that's the very first poll reporting for the riding. We obviously don't know where that's coming from. We don't have sort of insight into that whole thing. How's the mood over at the campaign office?
Oh, well, it's always one of those things. Could be better, could be worse.
Yeah.
But people are feeling good about the campaign we ran and the kind of. We ran a very friendly campaign in Huron-Bruce. Tried to avoid the kind of real nastiness that happens in some places. We'd love to see more orange across the country and across this area, but we feel good about the campaign we ran.
And talk a little bit, we don't often talk a lot about this, but Paul, you know this well, the volunteers that it takes to run a campaign.
Well, that's the thing that I guess makes me sad in this election, because in Huron-Bruce, 4 of the 5 candidates' supporters, their volunteers, the people who worked so hard, are going to be casting ballots that earn no representation because we didn't switch after 2015 from the first past the post system to a proportional system. And that to me is such a tragedy because everybody's worked hard. The candidates have worked hard, their volunteers, their supporters have worked hard on the campaign. And to have a situation where on election night only one candidate's ballots count toward representation and everybody else's in effect just go in the trash bin, really, if you consider that the point of voting is to be part of a parliamentary process where you're represented. 4 out of 5 aren't. And it's a tragedy in our riding, but it's a catastrophe across the country, because if you look at the votes as they're coming in, the progressive voice and the liberal or the conservative voice in Atlantic Canada, the NDP voice, the Green voice, are not going to be represented in the proportion to which they actually earn seats. And then we get out to Alberta, and there's the chance that there won't be any liberal voices around the table if they lose Ralph Goodall. And there may be 20 or 25% support for the NDP that doesn't have a voice at the table. And so you end up with this balkanization of Canada, which is tragic.
How do we deal with that, though, Tony, at the local level or even at the constituent level everywhere, when you can't find common ground? Like, we know where the NDP want to go in terms of what kind of situation they want to have. We know what the Liberals want. We know what the Conservatives want. So everybody wants a different piece of have the pie cut differently for different folks.
Well, that's where you use a citizens' assembly, which is a group of people gathered the way you would a jury, to sit down, and people who don't have a vested interest in a particular political system, which was the tragedy of Justin Trudeau getting a phony majority government and then saying, well, not interested in that anymore.
Well,
and so the Citizens Assembly lets you do that, and that's what happened in Ontario.
I don't know whether you were part of that group here that met in Goderich. We had an assembly of people here in Goderich, and we talked about the various options. And I mean, I was privy to some of those conversations in Ottawa, and it just was going nowhere. And for Mr. Trudeau to hammer away at that when basically it wasn't going anywhere. It was a pretty tough decision.
I think that's fundamentally incorrect to the point of almost being dishonest.
Well, no, I'm
because
being
when
honest.
87% of the public submissions to the committee was to go to proportional representation, and 88% of the expert witnesses said develop a proportional system, the committee hadn't been tasked with developing the system. They were to come back with a recommendation, then they came back. We need to move to a proportional system. Then you task something like a Citizens Assembly. That's what happened in Ontario, and then it got sabotaged by the McGuinty government at the time, because instead of letting the information that the Citizens Assembly had produced, which was clear explanation of why our current system doesn't work well in a multi-party system, which we have. It's fine for a two-party system, but it doesn't work well in a multi-party system. Mm-hmm. They came in, they explained it clearly, they explained their alternative, and then the government of the day wouldn't let that information be reprinted and created a very confusing thing for that referendum. So then we ended up with a phony Win majority, and now we have a phony Ford majority. And we have that horrible policy lurch where one government tries to undo everything the previous government did. Costly, wasteful, destructive. We need a system, and most OECD countries now use some form of proportional representation, so that we end up with governments that represent the majority of the people, and the majority position changes over time, but it changes slowly. It doesn't do the big policy lurch that our 39% phony majority here when a 39% phony majority
you've
there.
also got many countries in Europe that are facing changes in government about every 3 or 4 months, 6 months, because they have so many parties. There's coalition governments all over the place. You know, no matter where you look in some of those countries.
Well, I think you're overstating that case too. I would encourage your listeners to tune into Fair Vote Canada's website and get the information from a bipartisan organization, because they indicate that most of the countries using proportional representation don't have government changes any more rapidly than we do in Canada. Well, and of course, yes, you have Italy. Yes, you have Israel. Those are the outliers. But they aren't the major part. They aren't the Scotlands, they aren't the Netherlands, they aren't, all these other countries that use it and use it pretty effectively. What we need to do is figure out how to design a good working system for Canada.
I was never opposed to it. I was never opposed to it. And I was prepared to go along with what we could find as a majority going forward. But that just didn't happen. So, and I'm no longer there, so.
You know what this feels like? This is kind of fun with you two. I feel like it's when we're watching an NHL game, and I said, I went to a fight and a hockey game broke out. I feel like I went to an election, and here we go. You two are.
He's Sherry.
Like, yeah, you guys. Do I have to get between you two? This is fun. This is fun.
We will use words.
You're good.
And gently too.
And gently, you are. So, but you raise some good topics. We've been talking all night along about how, the environment seemed to be the number one issue driving people this time. But it feels like next time, or on the highest on the radar, will be proportional representation. It feels like this is rising up as we might have a minority government, coalition, whatever. It feels like it's the new next issue.
It's an old issue that never gets resolved.
Right.
And that's the problem. If we'd had proportional representation in 2004, the Greens would have had a caucus of 12 members. In that particular parliament. So their voice would have been present in proportion to how Canadians voted for them. And wouldn't we have been better to be making that transition and hearing their voices during the last 15 years, so that we were taking strides and making movement in the environment? Because, if we're now told we have 10 or 11 years in which to make drastic changes, if we don't do something pretty significant, and it doesn't look like Elizabeth May, she might hold the balance of power, but it doesn't look that way right now. If we don't start making some serious movement in the next 4 years, things could be very drastic. And economies, societies work better if you make change gradually. And to me, that's one of the beauties of an effective democracy, is you make change gradually. You don't need to wait for a coup d'etat. You don't need to wait for a revolution for things to get so bad that finally you blow up. You make change gradually. And our system actually doesn't let us make that kind of change as smoothly as we could. I mean, it would be a disaster if the environment had been the key thing and we had a green phony majority government this time, because they've only had 2 members sitting in the House. If they had 172 now, as a result of the environment having been, the big issue, they'd have had 170 inexperienced people who didn't even know where Ottawa was, some of them, and 2 people who'd been in the House. That wouldn't have given us a good or effective government. No. So you need this kind of change to build and grow more slowly, which a proportional system would let you do.
It's, do you want to hear some results coming in?
Sure.
This is fun. I never get enough of you, Tony. You just bring this passion to the room.
Oh, he's got a few more years left in him.
I was going to say, where do you put your energy after this one? But here's where we stand now.
I didn't finish cleaning out that chicken pen. I got to go back to it tomorrow.
You don't have to
afternoon.
work tonight, do you?
Not tonight,
Okay,
but tomorrow,
good.
and I've got to make apple butter tomorrow morning.
Oh, well,
so.
I wouldn't be offended if a little jar showed up, or if I'll even do a pickup.
Well, call me back.
Okay, I'll
call
do
me
that.
back in to talk about proportional representation
I
after we
will
see
do
where
that.
the numbers fall out.
So here's where we
after
stand. The numbers keep refreshing, but the Liberals are standing at 130, the Conservatives at 98, Bloc Québécois at 29. Is that a big number out of
That's
Quebec?
a big number
That's
for
a
the
big
Bloc
number.
Québécois.
13 for NDP, Tony,
Yeah.
and 1 Green, of course. Whisper in my ear if you like. Oh, we have more numbers, actually 2 polls in now in here.
I'm Huron-Bruce.
We have heard that the CBC is projecting a Liberal government. We yet don't know if that's majority, minority, and something tells me
That'd
we
be
won't
minority.
know minority. So 2 polls in, not a huge amount here in Huron-Bruce yet. I'm assuming these are advanced polls, but you tell me. Ben with 49.5% of the vote, 326. Alan Thompson, 232. Tony, 71 with 10%, almost 11% really of the vote. Nicholas, Green Party, 19, 2.9%. And we're watching Nicholas closely because he told us if he got over 2,000 votes, it's the most he's ever earned and we're kind of cheering for him.
Right.
We're really
Oh, he
cheering
did
for him on
that.
that.
What's Nicholas got?
Total votes are 1.3 million across the country so far.
What does Nicholas have?
Oh, Nicholas? I don't know what Nicholas has. He has 19.
19.
So he's got a little ways to go.
How many do you got?
Tony's got 71 so far.
71.
And Kevin Clerk's is at 1.7%. So it'll be interesting. What'll be interesting is Huron-Bruce. How does it divvy up? How does if the NDP surges, where does that come from? Does that come from the Liberals? Does the Green take from the Liberals?
That's a bit of a shared thing there. There's
Yeah.
a lot will come from the Liberals.
Yeah.
But the Greens will share some of that because they would see themselves as not being able to do what the NDP could do because there's going to be more seats and more representation. From
And
the
some
NDP.
people are voting, obviously, their conscience, which we hope they are. Some people, we talked a lot about, there's people who are voting strategically. And then there's people who say, forget that, I'm voting for who I think should. What do you think about that, Paul?
Well, strategic voting may work, and that application may work in certain situations, but I don't think it works very well in politics. First of all, you can't control what people do.
Well, you can't second guess the other
No.
80,000 voters in your thing. I always felt that if I voted strategically and the candidate I wanted lost by 2 votes, those are both my vote.
That's
because
right.
it's the vote I took from them and gave to somebody else
That's right.
creates that 2-vote spread.
That's so true.
God, I would feel terrible if
Would
that
you
happened.
though? I couldn't sleep at night thinking about that. You just vote your conscience. The polls are really starting to. Well, I should say we have 259 polls. We have 5 in, but the numbers are jumping here. So Ben Lobb, and again, these could be more inland, but Ben Lobb with over 1,000 at 55.6% of the vote. Alan Thompson with half of that, approximately at 555 at 28.7%. Tony, you jumped up to 206, still around 10.6%. Nicholas has jumped up to 71 at 3.7%, which is higher for him, I think, at this point. And Kevin Clerk's trailing at 27. So very early. We don't know where these polls are coming in. Now, for you, I had dropped into your campaign office, and we want to be hearing from Vanastra. We want to be hearing from, obviously, your
Huron
home
Park,
area,
yep.
Huron Park, obviously Goderich, huge areas. So again, we don't know yet which polls are coming in, but we don't count them too quickly, do we?
No.
Well,
but
things change dramatically at
I
times.
suspect they're probably rural polls.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
seem to get them in quicker.
They're the
than
quickest ones
the
because they're
town.
smaller
Yeah,
polls, is
yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you check in, now with your campaign, you both have the sort of inside track that you can share with viewers. Throughout the evening, are you calling into the returning office to kind of hear what
No,
polls?
you don't call into the returning office. Ideally, at least we don't.
Okay.
Ideally, if we have scrutineers in a poll, they call into our office with the results
Okay.
of the polls that they counted.
Okay.
But the returning office is not in the business of sharing information
So
with them.
they have representative, you have a
You
representative there.
yes, a candidate representative.
So you'll know where your kind of treasure troves are, and you'll be watching those, and you'll say, okay, they haven't come in yet. Well, you just made a nice jump here, Tony, at 256, 11.2% up. What's a good night look like for the NDP in Huron-Bruce?
Well, it has varied dramatically depending on the year. We've gotten the year Paul Klopp took the riding in 1990.
Provincially, right?
Provincially, he got 34% of the vote.
Wow.
But it was the Huron riding at that point. It wasn't Huron-Bruce. And if I remember correctly, Grant Robertson got 25%. I got 18% in 1988 in the free trade campaign. And I got 3% in 1993.
Well, that doesn't sound nice.
Well, it was a very interesting campaign. People were still very undecided up to the last days.
Wow.
It was quite interesting. But politics has its sloshing waves, and that particular slosh, the Ray government, which was the NDP provincial
Yep.
government at the time, had received a lot of negative media. There was some studies done that suggested that the media was about 80% negative, which
Wow.
was very interesting. There's an old joke that Bob Ray was out at his cottage, and he was throwing the stick for his dog out into the lake, and the dog walked on the water out, picked up the stick, brought it back, and the media's looking, throws it out, walks on the water, and the headline the next day was, "Ray's dog can't swim."
Wow.
So,
Wow.
That's pretty negative, isn't
That's
it?
wow.
So, the politics is an interesting process. So I've had a variety. So 11% looks pretty good. When I first ran in the 80s, a good poll for us was 10%.
Okay.
Now a good poll for us could be over 50%.
Yeah.
So a lot more people have voted for us, but there's still, the anxiety that, well, if you're not going to win, I don't want to vote for you.
Right,
I want to
right.
vote for the winner. And of course, I've always felt unless you were voting for what you wanted, you were kind of defeating yourself if you didn't vote for what you wanted.
Remind us all the magic number for national number of seats. What do you need to
170.
170. So the Liberals right now are at 143. Conservatives are at 104. Bloc Québécois 29. NDP at 20. And Green at 1.
Well, one of the interesting things will be to compare the vote total, the popular vote total for the Bloc versus the NDP, because
Yes.
the Bloc could have far fewer votes,
That's
but
right.
end up with far more
Oh,
seats.
for that,
you're
And
right.
That's one of the tragedies
We
of
go
our
back
system.
we go back to that, right? Hey, we're up to 7 polls in. We're not going to keep doing this all night. At some point, we'll have to close off and wake up and see how it all went. But Mr. Ben Laub at 55.6% of the vote with roughly 1267. Allen was 633 at 27.8%, and 256, 11.2. And Nicholas has climbed to 89, 3.9%. That's a bit of a jump.
Yep.
And 32 for Kevin at 1.4%. So we're still seeing the People's Party probably hasn't carved much off of the Conservative Party at all this time
clearly
around.
Not. Very clearly not.
I didn't think they would.
The Liberals had carved quite a bit more off in the 2015
Yeah.
election.
Yep. So really, we got the NDP, the Liberal, and maybe the Green kind of carving out some of those
Yeah.
votes, and then Ben really being the Conservative voice. And
Well, he's going to, depending where those are coming from, that doesn't
yep.
surprise
This
me.
could be very rural.
But once you
Yeah,
see
we'd love the popular
some
vote.
other areas, that'll change dramatically.
So popular vote Liberal is at 12, I hear, 12%, is that right? Popular vote?
What? No.
No,
It's
that
gotta be
can't.
high.
It's got to be higher than that, we think.
It's gotta be
You're talking
30.
about provincially or federally?
12.4, federally?
Federally, it's gotta be.
Federally. It's got to be, no, that's what we're hearing, but we'll double check that.
Oh, it's gotta be 30-some%.
Yeah, and we're at 145 now Liberal nationally, so we're creeping up on that magic number, but do you think that takes a lot to move it to
It's
170?
going to take a lot to move it once you hit the prairies and then
Yeah.
get into
Yeah.
British
'Cause
Columbia.
once we get out of
They're not
Ontario,
gonna-
right?
Yeah, once you're out of Ontario, it's not going to. And again, it's a tragedy because there are Liberal voters in British Columbia, but they're not going to get much representation.
No.
And
38% for the
38?
Liberals. That was 36 Conservatives, so 38 to 36. That was Alberta that we had the number. 16 NDP. 16 NDP. And that's the popular vote.
The Greens are going to make
Yeah, what
sound
you-
happy, but I think they're going to feel very disappointed actually because going into
I
this
can see
election
that. I
they
can
were
see that, yeah.
claiming to be level with the New Democrats, and yeah, this hasn't been the election I think they were hoping for. It'll be interesting to see how Kitchener Centre and Guelph
Yeah.
do.
Yep.
So yes, they'll have some members, but again, it will be terribly unproportional to the actual popular vote, and their popular vote will have been depressed precisely because people will have felt they didn't have a chance of winning in their riding. So, yeah, I'm pretty hard on our system, but I think it's failing us very badly.
Because again, we talked about these perspectives, right? And that's why we're shining a light on Huron-Bruce. Is we want to get these views out because we think this could be the next environmental issue next time around. Right?
Well, it's in some ways, it's the underlying issue below all our other issues. Because until we fix the system, we aren't going to make stable progress on the issues of concern to the majority of Canadians. Because we'll end up playing political games with them. And if you have a stable majority in that everybody's vote counts equally and everybody's vote earns representation, then you get a parliament that reflects that representation, and then you try and come up with a position that the majority can support, whether it's be which pipeline will we accept, or how far do we go in terms of environmental stuff, or how far do we go in terms of social equity, taxation changes. Any of those things depend on having some kind of stable base that really reflects what the majority of Canadians want, parliament after parliament after parliament. And so having a system that actually does mean that everybody's vote counts really is a precursor to addressing these other problems effectively, because otherwise you address them one way with one phony majority and the other guys play politics with it and shift it back. So you've got a carbon tax. No, we won't have a carbon tax. Yes, we will have, and so you don't, or we'll build the Spadina subway. No, we won't build the Spadina subway, or no, so back and forth in ways that are costly and don't let you make real progress. And that's why that issue should be sort of a fundamental one. And hopefully, if we do end up with a minority parliament, the parties holding the balance of power will say, this is critical, we need to solve this now, and do something like a citizens' assembly that takes it out of the hands of the vested interests of the politicians and puts it into a interested but unaffiliated group of people chosen as if they were a jury to come up with a recommendation for something that would work for a country as vast as ours.
Let me give us an update, and I'm going to ask you a question. And soon we're going to have, I think, Ben Lobb Skype in. I think we'll be able to get him. But we're at 10 polls in for Huron-Bruce. Again, we don't know where they're coming from, so you can't read everything into this. But we have Ben Lobb at just under 2,000 at 55% of the vote. Allen with 26.6% of the vote, and NDP up to 12.4, up to 12. And Nicholas at 4.4%. So the green is actually seems to be kind of climbing here a bit.
Well.
And then the PPC is staying fairly constant at that 1.6. It's not really breaking through at all. Before we pass and talk to Ben in a little bit, talk a little bit about nationally your leader. So he's really come on the stage and really made a big bang for himself. So what's it been like to work with him this go around?
Well, it's been very satisfying because, as you remember, I talked about representation,
Yep.
regeneration, and redistribution, and our national campaign, as led by Jagmeet Singh, certainly tied in with those values and commitments. And one of the exciting things was in this election, they had a candidate phone call with the leader
Yes.
a couple of times throughout the campaign. And the last one was just wonderful to hear his voice because, he's energetic, he's hopeful. And he said, we're coming up in the polls. And yes, it's because of all of you working out there together, but it's also because we're talking about the things that matter to people and are important to people, and that these are the things that we're wanting to do. And so that's why we're in this. It's what we want to do for the people of Canada. Okay. And it was just great to hear him. And so it's been a pleasure working with him. And I think he's come across really well to people. I know when I was on the street after the leaders debate, I was hearing from people who I wouldn't have expected to hear from necessarily in a positive way for Jagmeet, saying, he was the one who acted like an adult during that thing. And so, yeah, he's been well received.
Well, that's great. And I think it's just great to get that perspective. We're going to switch gears now, Tony, and we're going to invite Ben on to Skype. So are you okay if you...
I get out of the way?
Yeah, I'm
happy to get out of the way, but...
The tactful way that I can say that.
I already said hi to Ben and gave him his copy of the Donut Economics.
Which I told Paul about, that you gave me a copy and made me sign it out, which I appreciate.
Well, I didn't make Ben. He got his copy because I agreed to give
I'm going to
each
bring
of the
that up with
candidates
him. I'm going to bring and Tony, again, thank you so much for all the time that you spent with us, and we appreciate your perspective.
Well, my pleasure, Roz.
Okay.
And Paul, always a pleasure.
Always
to
a
see
pleasure.
You.
Good to see you again, Tony.
Take care.
All the best to you.
Okay, Paul, we are going to have, I believe, Ben Skype in with us, and I'll just get word in my ear when that's happened. But the polls keep climbing. We're at 25, and I think soon we'll have Ben. We have Ben. I see Ben. There's Ben. Can you see Ben?
Yes,
There he is. He got up really close and personal there, Ben.
yeah.
Look at that smile on his face. Does that have anything to do with 15% of the popular vote at this point, Ben? Can you hear me? Can Ben hear me? Not sure if Ben can hear me, guys. He's smiling.
Try that.
I think it's Ben. Oh, okay, we'll try again on Ben there, but, so we'll get Ben back in a second here, but, so we're at 25 polls in, Paul. And Ben sits at 56%. So again, they could very well be the rural ones. Allen's roughly at 25.7%. Tony's 12%, so he seems to be hovering there, but again, we don't know if some of those big ones have come in. And Nicholas seems to keep climbing at 4.5%, so he's doing quite well. And again, Kevin Clark has kind of just stayed under that 2%.
Yeah.
So it kind of feels like they're starting to come in fast and furious now.
Yeah, or they will. Once they start, they'll really come in fast.
And you can't, at what point, Paul, do they call it? At what point do you say, okay, I've seen enough, I know enough, I can't change the numbers?
That will change only once they have a broad representation of the riding. If it's all rural coming in, and they know that traditionally there's been a high percentage of different vote in the urban areas, they'll want to have a pretty good number before they make that determination.
So they're going to want to see the Concardans, the Goddardges.
Oh, yes.
The
north-south.
And north-south,
Yeah, the
Exeter, Exeter being a big one. Yeah.
Exeter's a big one. There could be a lot of Exeter polls in that.
And again, we talked earlier about Eco-Exeter, so we've got a lot of youth in that area that are voting perhaps for the first time. And, they could all be green for all we know. They could be NDP. They could be.
Well,
it's an open.
It was one of those elections where in my history of watching elections, I thought it was the most frustrating election because nobody seemed to be going anywhere except the two parties that they thought were going to go nowhere to start with were the ones that are making the gains. Like, no one thought Jagmeet Singh would do what he did, but he presented himself in a way that people could accept. He wasn't part of the fray. And whether you thought you liked him or not didn't matter. The fact is, he was a gentleman.
Yeah, that's the word for it, right?
And to me, I always tried to conduct myself that way in my years in politics. And when we left the electoral office that I held, I can go back to any of these candidates, Tony included. We're still friends.
Right. And I love the exchange that you two had. I love that you can get blustery and you can have passion and you can state your case and you can listen to each other and really have that, right?
Oh yeah. No, I don't take offense with someone who.
You've heard worse. You've heard worse.
Much
always.
worse.
Well, guess where right now across the nation, the Liberals are at 145, the Conservatives at 108, the Bloc at 34. So that's a little high for the Bloc, right?
Yeah. 38?
34.
34.
And the NDP are kind of stuck at that 20, but we haven't got Ontario probably in yet, maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. And one Green as well. And as we shift down, we have 35 polls in Huron-Bruce. Ben is coming down a little bit at 54%, so he came down a couple percentages. He's still saying around 3,700 votes. And Allen's still around at 27%. And Tony's kind of around at 12.4, so he's kind of a little higher than he has been. And Nicholas is still kind of keeping in there at that 4.3, and Kevin's just still under that 2 mark. So maybe we're starting to see, I don't know, some of the more, I wouldn't call them urban, but more the towns and such like that.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. We know that these numbers probably will change dramatically when we get the Kincardines in, right?
Yeah. Once Goderich comes, I think there'll be some.
And we'll see some NDP in that one too, won't we?
Yeah, right.
We'll see some big, that's because Tony's already at 1,000 votes, which is pretty good. And Nicholas is at 373, so I think he might bust through his 2,000. Yeah, which is pretty interesting. Did we get any luck with Ben on the Skype? Not sure if we did or not. We're gonna see. Soon. We're going to get Ben with us pretty soon. So again, we seem to be, the Bloc of Québécois still stuck at 34, so we're in a bit of a holding pattern.
Yeah, I think that's about all they're going to get. I don't think
so?
you see much more on that.
Well, we just jumped up again. We have 40 polls in Huron-Bruce. Ben now saying at 52.8, so we're starting to see that come down a bit. Starting to see that come down. Allen at 28, so it's gone up 1 percentage. And Tony's still staying strong at 12.5, so he's kind of kept a hold there, hasn't he? And Nicholas staying strong at 4.5. So a bit of a holding pattern on those middle parties. And then will we see Ben kind of come down and Allen come up? Yeah,
I think you're going to. I would expect that. This was not expected to be a runaway for anybody.
People were really, they thought this would be a nail biter.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, the NDP and the Green take from the Liberal, right?
Yeah. Well, if the NDP, I guess the Liberals at one time thought, if the way the NDP went into the election, they weren't expected to do much.
Right.
And if they would have come in and instead of getting 8,000 votes, end up with getting 5, that would have been the margin.
Yeah, because last time, in 2015, Allen, of course, running for the first time, he was separated from Ben by about 3,000 plus in an inch, kind of.
Yeah.
And if he carved that off, I mean, that was doable to get this time, but it would take maybe getting out the vote, changing some minds, but if any of that vote, that 3,000 is carved off by the Green or the NDP, is going to make that up too.
And if the tide, this is a Conservative riding, let's not forget it.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And it takes a lot to change these people. And I always said, a Liberal is more apt to change than a Conservative.
Okay.
And it's not a reflection on, it's just, that's the way it is. It's
hard-coded more.
It's reality.
Yeah.
And it's just the way it is in this riding. And but if the tide is running against us, and there was so many things, there was blackface, and there was all these things. It's a wonder we're in the race at all.
It seemed to strike just at all the wrong times for the Liberals, didn't it?
Yeah, the wrong times. That's right. And so when you look at everything, when I went in '93, I beat the incumbent by 8,000 votes.
That's a lot.
And that seemed like a well, it didn't seem so unusual at the time, but when you look back now, it was. But then really there were only two Conservatives survived in Canada.
That's right. That was when it was decimated, right?
Elsie Wayne
Yep,
and
yep.
Mr.
That's right. It was,
Charest.
well, the Conservatives have risen a little bit nationally. They're up to 112, so we probably are seeing some Ontario seats come in. Liberals are kind of stuck at 145, and the Bloc is up to 36 now. So that's interesting.
Oh.
Yep, and 21 for the NDP, so they've gone up one. So the Bloc Québécois seems
They
like
weren't
Quebec.
done yet.
They weren't done yet. So 112 for the Conservatives. So it'll be interesting. Will the Bloc be the opposition party? That's happened one other time, right?
It could be.
50 polls in here in Huron-Bruce. Ben remains at 52%. Alan has risen up to 29%. So we're starting to see that curve. And Tony is just riding that 12.5, 12.4. And same with Nicholas and Kevin. So those three are saying pretty firm, and we're seeing this back and forth. We'll see what happens there, but it's starting to get a little bit more dynamic.
I wonder if at any point was there a big block of voters come in at once?
Yeah, you know what? We seem to have about 5 polls that just came in the last little bit.
What about the advance poll? Where
I can't know if we can tell that. Is there a way that we can tell that? We have total votes right now are at 10,500 roughly. Is that enough? Advance votes, 29%. So roughly we have 80,000 some registered voters.
Yeah, about 50,000 will vote.
50 or 60. We might have a big election.
Yeah.
So we might have 1/5 of the votes in right now.
Yeah.
So 20% of the votes could be in.
You would think if they were counting them early like that the advance would be in there.
Sorry, in my ear I hear once again. Oh, Blanchett wins his seat in the Bloc. Is it the Bloc?
Oh, yes, I would.
Yeah, he's got that, no problem. Liberals are at 144, so they've gone up, I think, 1. Conservatives at 113. So it doesn't look like anyone's going to inch their way past a majority, does it?
No.
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 So what'll be interesting if you start thinking about who can team up with who, Paul?
Well, I think that's not a very difficult situation to analyze, I don't think, because of the natural inclination and the policy similarities between the NDP and the Liberals in terms of all of these parties, even the Bloc Party, have a policy on an environment much stronger than the Conservative policy. And so and Mr. Singh has said from the NDP that he's not going to team up with Conservatives under on any cost. So Singh, if it's a minority situation with the Liberals, and of course, as is the constitutional way of doing things, tradition has it that the one who has been the Prime Minister, even though he has less seats, is the first person
has the opportunity to form a government,
right?
And so right now, if you were to do some quick math, 143 and 23 would take us up to 166, and then that would 142. It looks like we might have lost one, a Liberal. Maybe they counted it wrong. So with the Green, we'd be at that number.
Yeah.
So they're creeping up on that 170 together, and certainly the Conservatives with the Bloc Québécois are not there.
No.
So I don't know if they would team up, but
I don't
so
know.
they're creeping up on that number. NDP at 22 now. Let's scroll back down and see where we stand locally, if any more has come in. No, we're still stuck at that 50 mark, 50 polls. So is the Goderich and sort of the Kincardines and Exeters, are they more involved in counting? Or?
Well, I don't know. There's a lot of polls.
Yeah.
A lot of polls, and I don't know how they do that, whether they en masse send them in.
Yep.
As Tony said, we have scrutineers, and they, once the votes are tabulated, they'd call them into the political party headquarters, and then the party disseminates those numbers.
One of the things we'll do if we get Ben on the line here, we got a few more polls in, is we'll ask him who he's heard from, because I know he's tracking obviously the polls and see which ones he has heard that have come in. But we're up to 60 polls now, so we're really creeping up. We have 12,500 roughly votes in, so we're definitely over the 20% mark, right? Ben, Andrew Scheer has won his seat, which is of no surprise. Ben is up to is around that 51%, 51.4, and Alan is kind of right at that 29.3. So nothing much has changed there. Tony, however, has jumped to the 13.
Has he?
He's made a breakthrough.
Has he?
He's
Yeah,
made a breakthrough,
yeah, yeah.
and the others are Nicholas and Kevin are right where they were. So Nicholas is at 566 votes. So the magic for him is 2,000. We're really cheering for him on that. So Ben is down to 51.1. Oh, I'm seeing a check mark on the screen here with 65 polls in next to Ben's name. What should we read into that?
65 polls then.
65 polls, and there's a check mark. I don't know if that means anything. Is anyone else hearing anything on that? Maybe not yet? Okay, good. So Liberals now still at 143. Conservatives have risen to 118. And the Bloc Québécois, they seem to go up and down by one, so it sounds like we're counting. They're still at 36, and we're kind of at a stalemate there. So not sure. I'm going to check some different sites.
See, it's early in Ontario, and that's where the Liberals can pick up.
They can totally pick it up. Yeah, Ben is still at that 51. We're not hearing anything yet from Ben on elected, no? Okay. 3 million across the country have voted, so.
3 million.
So that's about 10%, right? A little bit less than 10%. Well, maybe more, given
They had,
that actually be a little bit more.
What
would
did we say, it was
it?
27, 200, no. How many voters? Yeah. 27 million voters, I think, in Canada. I
Yeah.
think that's what the
Yeah,
census
so that's
is,
pretty.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
pretty high. So, any luck on getting Ben? No. We're. I'm just looking here. Just as I see some polls, I'm seeing, and this is just what I'm pulling up online, that the Conservatives defeat the Liberals in our riding. But we'll see. That seems a little soon to be calling that, doesn't it?
I would think so.
So we're still at 65 polls. At any point, Paul, the polls keep coming in throughout the night, right? So even if someone is elected, we'll still see the polls come in, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
absolutely.
throughout.
Like all the polls come in, there's people who went to bed already.
Yep.
And woke up the next morning and found out, I mean, Mary Gaunt
Yes.
was one of those,
Yes.
going back many years. He went to bed thinking he had lost by a few votes, and he got up the next morning and he found out he had won.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? That was Murray.
Mary
Wow.
Gaunt. Yeah.
Wow. Wouldn't that be a great thing? Okay,
Yeah.
we just jumped to 70 polls, 14,400 votes in Huron-Bruce. Ben stays right at that magical 51.3% still. He's kind of holding true there. So again, we don't know where those are at. And Nicholas is just a little bit above at 4.6, so he's climbing. And Tony's climbed to 13.4%.
Is he?
So again, that seems to be a good showing for the
Yeah.
NDP tonight.
Yeah. Well, the NDP will do better. I had a feeling as we went through the election that the Green weren't doing what they thought
Okay.
they were going to be doing. And I could sort of see
Them going to perhaps to the NDP.
sort of going another direction.
Yeah, it's
They've only got the one seat yet?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So Ben, we'll see. Do we have him yet on the thing? Let's roll some streeters. So we're up at the farmers market and we have Maggie here.
Maggie, yes.
What kind of dog is Maggie?
She's a cockapoo.
Cockapoo. How old is she?
She's 7 or
7?
8, something
She's
like
cute.
that.
She is
She's
cute.
gorgeous. She's just had a groom, so
Oh,
yeah. So,
she's looking her best.
Yes.
Looking her best.
Yes.
You know, all the candidates, I understand, are trying to look their best too. As we get close to the October 21.
Yes.
Have you made up your mind?
I have. I tend to be party loyal,
Okay.
unless the leader is a complete twat.
Okay. And so you're being party loyal this time?
I am. I'm a Liberal supporter.
Okay. So you've made up your mind firm and full.
Justin Trudeau, he is a humanitarian. He believes in people and not he's not about just the money. He's about people moving forward and living a better life and being healthy and being safe and being included and you know, that just, I can't beat that. None of the others can really beat that right now.
Good. And Maggie would agree?
Oh, Maggie agrees with anything if I give her food.
Okay, good. I like Maggie. She's a good one. She's a good one. Thank you, and enjoy your Thanksgiving.
And you too.
So I understand you're visiting from, is it Cambridge? Yeah. So you're not from the Goderich, Huron-Bruce area, but interesting, your dad is running for this federal election.
Yeah.
What party is he running for?
People's Party of Canada.
Wow, and what do you think about this upcoming election?
I think it's going to be exciting, and People's Party is a new party, so I don't know how that's going to end.
And you've been at all the debates watching your dad, right? What have you taken away?
Well, it's really cool. Like, I learned about a bunch of new, like, laws and stuff like that, and I learned about, like, a bunch of the policies of all the parties.
Yeah, and, you know, how far off until you can vote?
6 years.
6 years. So are you getting keen to be a voter?
Yeah.
And do you think you'll ever run like your dad?
Maybe.
Yeah? Yeah? So we could look for you to be a prime minister. What would we call you? Prime Minister?
Maeve.
Maeve. Well, there you have it. An early campaigner for Prime Minister Maeve. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So we're up here again at the farmers market, and we're asking folks, and if you've decided yet who you might vote for this October 21.
No, I haven't decided personally.
Do you have something? Is there something that's really important to you?
Health.
Healthcare?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. So that's going to be your major influence. Okay, good. I'm going to turn to your friend now. How about you? Have you made up your mind?
Yes.
And what's important to you?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Is there, and you don't have to say who, but is there a party or candidate
Yes.
that you think does that better?
I hope so.
Okay,
I
good.
hope so.
Good. All right. So have you put in your vote already? Or you're going to
Not
wait?
yet. Wait till 21st.
You like to wait till the
Yeah.
21st? Yeah. Good.
A little closer.
A little closer. Good stuff. All right.
Okay.
Well, we'll look for you at the polls.
Thank you.
All right. Have a happy Thanksgiving to you both.
You bet.
Okay. So that was Paul, the last of our streeters up at the farmers market. A lot of fun. And the young lady. So I asked her. I said, "Oh, what are you doing here?" She goes, "Well, I'm actually not from here." I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And she says, "Cambridge. I'm up visiting." And I said, "Oh, and what do you think of the election?" She goes, "Well, my dad's running." I said, "Your dad's running?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what party?" And she says, "The People's Party of Canada." And so she's been at all the debates. She's been following along. And I said, "We might be calling you Prime Minister Maeve down the road." Because she was a very articulate, impassioned young lady. So intrigued to see that youth. She was probably maybe 11, 12, I'm guessing.
Oh, I see.
And she was just a young'un. And wow, such spirit. And it hit me the other day, Paul. I was up in Collingwood checking out the fall colors this weekend. And when I was driving back, you know what road I drove down? Agnes MacPhail.
You're kidding.
Yeah, the very first,
Yeah, the
right,
first woman.
women representative. So
Yeah.
made me think of young Prime Minister Maeve
Isn't that
there.
right? I'm just trying to think whether I've ever been on that road. I mean, I certainly know who she is.
Kind of up,
Yeah.
up the way. I was just, kind of cutting back through, and everywhere I'm looking at the signs. I'm thinking,
Yeah.
all I did was, as I drove back, was reflect how much ground you cover when you're running a campaign.
Oh, well, this is a long riding.
It's a huge riding, right?
It's a 2-hour ride from one end to the other.
And with all, like Alan said, he crisscrossed and everything. Well, let me tell you where we stand. Are you intrigued? So the Liberals are at 149, Conservatives at 117. The Bloc is kind of shifted to 35, so they came down. They probably got corrected there.
Yeah,
And
some Liberals maybe got
I think they
some of
got
that.
in there. The NDP has risen to 25.
Have they?
Yep. And Green, I don't know what number we were expecting. But
2. We had 2 at
well,
the
they're
left.
at 3.
They're at 3 now.
That's kind of a breakthrough when you
That's
think.
a breakthrough,
That's
yeah.
a breakthrough. So if you take 149 plus 3, that's 152 plus the NDP, you're over at 70, right? You're over the 170
Oh,
mark.
yeah.
Here's what's happening locally with 18,500 votes in roughly and 90 polls. So we're really starting to get there now. Ben Lobb at 49% of the vote. Allen at 31.5%. Tony at 13.3%. Nicholas holding on there at 4.5 at 838. And Kevin Clerk's at 1.7. So really, it doesn't look like the PPC has really carved anything off.
It appears often in elections, once a trend is started, if it's 1.7 or 8
It's
points,
well sticks.
it sort of goes across the riding that way.
Isn't it interesting?
You wonder how that is, but I've seen that so many
Really?
times. Yes.
And there's
yes.
been different parties, like kind of unique parties over the years, right? You've seen the National Law Party or
Oh,
something like
yeah.
that. So
Marijuana
PPC,
party. at one
marijuana
time,
party,
the
right?
Communist Party.
That's right. So 1.7.
Libertarians.
That's that's 331 people. That's so that really, you know, if that carved off of Ben, it hasn't thrown him any shade, has it?
No.
You're wondering again if you put the Liberals and the NDP together, you're at roughly 44%. And then with the Green, maybe 48. So then you're kind of equal
Now,
to
once you're in that 50, if you're in that 50% or 48% bracket,
hard to turn it.
You can't. Well, I mean, this can still be turned, but it's pretty hard for others to
climb away at that.
Especially when there's multiple parties, for them to do much with.
Well, we've got an increase in the Liberal at 150 now, and NDP at 24. So just a little bit of a climb in the Liberal. So it looks like between the two, they're definitely over that 170 mark. Do I have anything in my ear? Well, Justin Trudeau, this will not be a surprise to you, won his seat.
Did he win his
Yeah.
seat?
I'm sure we're all shocked by that.
Yeah.
I'm sure we're all shocked by that. Did you expect that, Kathy? No. Kathy said that's a shock. Now, what, 152 now for the Liberals?
Is that right?
So is that's starting to look pretty good,
Well,
right?
it's certainly a lot better than what people.
Getting better. Okay, we have 100 polls in Huron-Bruce, so we're almost at the halfway mark, 20,000 votes and 300 and change. So again, if we're expecting around 58,000, who lost their vote? Bernier lost his seat.
Bernier lost his seat.
Okay, that's
They
probably
thought-
not a surprise,
Yeah,
right?
they thought he would.
That's not a surprise. Ben is sitting at almost a cool 10,000 votes at 49%, 0.3. Alan is still at that 31.1, and Tony's still at that 13.4. So it's like you said, we seem to be in a holding pattern. Maybe we haven't seen the North yet.
I don't know. I know that the North did it for me, but
Yeah, it seems early in a way. There's a lot of polls. We haven't heard from 159 polls. So we still have a lot of polls to come in. We're counting down because we have 7 minutes left on air. Paul, you and I have 7 minutes left to
7 minutes that we can
solve the world.
That we can put this all together and give people.
We might be waking up. You might be hearing about it. You're going to head over to Alan's, right?
Yes, we are.
I know you are. And so the Liberals are at 152. I think we kind of know where the nation's going.
Yes.
But at home,
We don't know here yet
it's trending. Well, Ben's down to 48.9%. So 105 polls are in. Not much change, really. Alan at 31.6, so not a lot of change there.
No.
So, and Tony's lost a couple, point percentages. So, yeah, Nicholas though is almost at his 1,000 mark. So, getting him there. It's kind of been. What do you think of tonight, Paul?
Well, I think this was a good venue for us to basically get down and chatter about elections. We've heard a lot of talk and chatter over the last 41 days, and after a while it gets a little frustrating. Now, we didn't solve any problems tonight.
No, we did not.
But I think we put a local touch to the issue of what it means to vote, what it means to, as a member of parliament, to do your job and go out and bring about change, bring about effective programs that benefit your municipality. I guess at the end of a day, at the end of a year, or end of a term, end of a career in politics, what do you say to yourself or to those that have supported you over these many years? What was my purpose for being there? What did I accomplish? What has changed? What is better now than what it was? You know, they ask those questions of the politicians, or of the people. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I had to ask myself, what did I do? And I can think of 3 or 4 things, many more, but 3 or 4 things that really stand out. Goderich Harbor being one of them. Stephen Truscott being another one.
That was a huge one. Huge one.
And democratic reform, the way we vote in the House, the freedom that's now and the latitude that's given to members of Parliament to express themselves in their vote according to their conscience. That wasn't there when I went there.
Wow.
Never in history had more than 3 people ever voted in a parliament against the government. Never more than 3. And during my first term there, over almost 30 people had voted against the government. Now it's all over the place. Many people.
It's
So, in reflecting back on that, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but when I think of a man like Stephen Truscott today is able to enjoy his family, live a normal life on the streets of Guelph.
Yep. Oh, I think we have.
The audio is not working.
We may not have. Oh, we're down to last couple minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to be a little sad. Just let you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a little. I'm going to. I'll let you know where we stand right now. Not a huge amount of change. We have 115 polls in, 25,000, roughly 24,000, not quite, votes in. Ben's at 48.8% and Allen's at 31.8. Tony a cool 13, and the rest are pretty well there. If we get a chance, we're going to be fighting the time here. If we get Ben in under the wire, we are. I don't think we're going to get him in under the wire. But Paul, it's leaning that way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's leaning. It's kind of hard. 115 polls. I don't know. But the Liberals, let me tell you where they stand. 154, 1 minute till we get Ben, or 1 minute till we finish up? End of show in 1 minute. Paul, as we close up, it has been just an honor to be with you tonight, and I'm a Stanley Township girl.
That's right.
I want to thank you and Kathy for being here with us, and enjoy this evening. Give our best to Alan, and we give our best to all the candidates. Thank you, and let's do this again.
Well, thank you, Rosalind, for doing this. I wasn't anticipating this, but any time that I can meet the constituency that I represented for many years and get their ear one more time and just let them know that I still care about you.
Well, we hear you. And Tony, we know it. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalind.
What a great show.
Yeah, great show.
Great show.
Yeah.